Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us here on Right Side Broadcasting Network as we have a number of news items to cover today, specifically heading to Capitol Hill in just a bit. And then, of course, today we're hearing that there is the first White House press briefing by Carolyn Leavitt scheduled for 1 o'clock Eastern. We saw that email come into us here at the station earlier this morning. So, again, a 10 a.m. hearing on Capitol Hill and a 1 o'clock press briefing live right here on Right Side Broadcasting Network as we are 8 days into the presidency, but it feels like more like 88 days, of course. Meantime, again, for the schedule, the 11 o'clock hour, 11 Eastern, this will not be live, but President Trump, according to the public schedule, will receive his daily intelligence briefing. And then again, at 1 o'clock, there will be the press briefing at the White House there with the great Carolyn Leavitt. So we'll be glued to our TV screens, our phones, our iPads and Surfaces and that kind of thing as we watch that press briefing later today to see how Carolyn handles the press. We'll see what kind of questions are asked from the press, but this will be quite telling. A lot of people will watch this across the streaming platforms here at the network. Of course, Rumble, a great place to watch on our channel there for Right Side Broadcasting Network as we get ready for a huge hearing today on Capitol Hill led by Senator Ted Cruz. I do want to share a little bit about that with you before we get to one of President Trump's recent Truth Social posts and also some other information that we're following here along the southern border. So let's go with what we're about to see at about 10 Eastern time here on the network. We're told that this hearing will examine the importance of the Panama Canal to the American economy and our national security, focusing on its role for U.S. trade and the challenges of capacity limitations and rising fees, and the potential dangers posed by the involvement of China and other foreign powers. A few facts and figures. The Panama Canal is a 51-mile man-made waterway that connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, of course. President Trump says our country is being, quote, ripped off by Panama over the 1977 Canal Treaty, which he says is a foolish, quote unquote, giveaway. I saw that information there. I would quote News Nation for that. And we know that Senator Cruz said upon announcing this hearing that serving 40% of U.S. seaborne container trade, the Panama Canal is vital to American economic and national security interests. We do have some photos of the canal, but also those huge shipping containers. I mean, we're talking many of them on those huge barges that you see that go through that 51-mile waterway down there in Panama. The United States paid for and built the Panama Canal, this according to Senator Cruz, but Panama is treating America unfairly and ceding control of key infrastructure to China. So Senator Cruz says he hopes that this hearing better informs members of the Commerce Committee about the challenges facing the maritime industry, the extent of foreign influence in Panama, and how the Panamanian government may be falling short of its obligations under the Neutrality Treaty. So again, that starts at 10 a.m. We'll have that in its entirety here on the network. And then later today at 1 o'clock Eastern, we will have the press briefing right here on Right Side with Carolyn Leavitt, who will be doing a great job, of course. I mean, you've seen Caroline all over cable news, but also right here on this live stream of Right Side Broadcasting Network various times at various rallies, and someone who is not only well-spoken, actually cares about this country and is an America First patriot. So it's going to be great to see her there at the press briefing later today at 1 o'clock. Meantime, as we shift our focus to the national emergency on the southern border, before we get there, we just want to thank some of our sponsors right here at Right Side Broadcasting Network. Colonial Metals Group, as you see on your screen there, Buffett's 277 billion warning. You get more information on Colonial Metals Group and also that financial backup plan with gold, with the IRA, 401k. All you have to do is go to freegoldguide.com/RSBN for more information on Colonial Metals Group. Having gold as a backup plan, a great diversification for your finances, great peace of mind, of course. And that free gold guide will get shipped right to you. So all you have to do is go to freegoldguide.com. And check out that website as well. And you can use that QR code. That'll bring you right to where you need to go for Colonial Metals Group. Again, as we shift our focus to the southern border, as you take that beautiful live look of the U.S. Capitol building, of course, today the hearing on the Panama Canal will be happening. Again, if you just missed our start of our broadcast, Senator Cruz is heading up an effort there to talk about the maritime industry and the United States seizing control of the Panama Canal. Now, seizing control, we're not saying by any sort of certain means. We'll see what happens with that. But transferring control would be more accurate to put it. As you see, that is the Panama Canal. We do know that, again, the Panama Canal is a 51-mile man-made waterway that connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. So instead of, if that canal was not there, you'd have to travel 7,000 miles all the way down to the southern tip of South Africa, all the way back up. So obviously that built in the early 1900s. And then President Trump says our country is being ripped off by Panama over the 1977 Canal Treaty. So Senator Cruz, once again, just if you're joining us, he says, serving 40% of U.S. seaborne container trade, the Panama Canal is vital to American economic and national security interests. You can see that huge barge right there, bringing a lot of shipments, the imports, the exports, and all that. So that'll be at 10 a.m. right there near the Capitol building on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. As we do shift our focus to the national emergency on the southern border, according to the Department of Defense, this is exactly from the .gov website of the military, 1,600 active duty personnel from the United States Army and the U.S. Marine Corps have deployed to the southern border to augment the approximately 2,500 service members already deployed supporting U.S. Customs and Border Protection's southern border mission. So that photo from the Pentagon directly on their .gov website that they have released to the public and to the media. So you see that photo there taken by one of the photographers with the Department of Defense there along the southern border as they put up that extra wiring, sharp wiring, of course, to secure our border the best they can as they guard the border, secure the border, seal the border, close the border, everything, and of course deport many millions across the country. That's happening by ICE. I do have a couple emails into spokespeople at Northcom, which is the folks that deal with the military and also the National Guard, to just hear more about what our service members are up to when it comes to securing our border. Also an email into the Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement to see specifically the numbers and what's going on throughout our country. Now, they do post various posts on social media. At last check, I believe it was 1,179, so 1,179 arrests. And I believe it was in one day that happened. So the numbers are starting to increase across the southern border and across our country of the deportation operation that we heard from President Trump back in Aurora, Colorado, when he first introduced Operation Aurora. So we're seeing on many fronts right now the president and his team taking care of business as we're seeing the executive order signed, but then we're seeing the actual boots on the ground, as you just saw that photo there. So let's go to President Trump's, the segment of Trump on Truth here at the network as we look at some of the latest President Trump post on Truth Social. You know, President Trump was talking about Southern California. As you know, he was there on Friday for the wildfires, and then he was talking about, referring to the military once again, that the United States military just entered the great state of California and under emergency powers, as you read there with me, turned on the water flowing abundantly from the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The days of putting a fake environmental argument over the people are over. Enjoy the water, California, exclamation point, as you see at the bottom of your screen there. So that from President Trump not too long ago. So we're seeing a lot of developments today. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Matthew Alvarez here. This is RSBN Live as we cover the news of the day here at the network, including today's 10 o'clock hearing on the Panama Canal. And then later today, there's a 1 o'clock press briefing, the first one of the Trump 2.0 administration. Carolyn Leavitt, the press secretary, we'll be taking care of business there as it's 9:11, now 9:12 Eastern Time. Thank you guys so much for streaming in as we cover today's news. And also, Robert McNeely will be joining me in studio tomorrow and through the week as we have many Senate hearings coming up from Kash Patel, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Kelly Loeffler as well for the Small Business Administration. So a lot of news, a long week, but always good that you're with us here at the network. Also, Tax Network USA, great to partner with this great group there. Always nice to have patriots helping other patriots. Well, that's exactly what you'll get with this group right here. All you have to do is give them a call, 800-357-1415. If you have any questions about your taxes, if you missed any back taxes, or maybe you have some questions coming up in April, 800-357-1415 is the number. You can settle those back taxes and get that peace of mind. Always good to have peace of mind, especially in the financial area of life. So tnusa.com/RSBN. All right, as we look at the other headlines that we're following at the network, of course, the huge Senate hearings that I was just referring to, which will happen right there outside of that Capitol building in the Senate chamber inside, of course. The three huge Senate confirmation hearings, as I mentioned, RFK Jr., Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and then, of course, Kelly Loeffler with the SBA. We're also seeing reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may meet with President Trump in D.C. next week. That, according to our own work here at the network and seeing from the Associated Press, Dylan Burrows, one of our writers here at the network, posted that on social media. Saw that. So that's what's awesome about Right Side. For those of you waking up in the morning, if you want to start your day out with some politics or seeing what's going on in the world, whenever you're ready to do that, of course, we need to have our rest and enjoy breakfast if you can and all that kind of thing. But if you're ready to dive into some news, all you have to do is go to Truth Social or go to X and look at RSBN's latest information, because we're posting at various hours. This isn't something that starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon randomly. These are stories that are brought to you by great writers here at the network. And on top of that, of course, you can always check, whether it's through social media or just go into our website or go to Rumble. You can go to other streaming platforms as well and just see, is there something that's upcoming? And usually there's going to be something, especially with the 24/7 news cycle and all of the events happening at the Capitol or at the White House or at the Pentagon, or if the president's going to meet with various world leaders. Case in point, the Prime Minister of Israel. We're looking at a possible meeting next week in D.C. With President Trump. So we'll have that coverage here at the network as well. Another story I mentioned yesterday, this is more of a kind of a feature story in some ways, but not really to the actual people of Eastern Oregon. There's this Greater Idaho movement. They want to be part of Idaho. They say there's a huge cultural divide with Portland and the western side of the state, and there's actually a movement. They're trying to get traction to have Idaho take over, not take over in the sense of, any bad means, but, just be able to get it approved through the state legislatures, the federal government. There is a way to actually having it approved for something like this to happen. So this is not just a pipe dream. And this is something that we, the people in Oregon, Eastern Oregon, say, I want to be part of Idaho. Interesting. So we may interview the head of the Greater Idaho movement. If we get that all taken care of this week, that would air on Friday. So just a programming note, if you're interested to check it out on Friday here. Robert McNeely will be with me in studio. It is 9:15 in the morning right now. Thank you so much for joining us. As you see on your screen, the hearing expected to begin at 10 a.m. So let's go over that once again for those of us that just joined the stream here. As I started out the broadcast, this is day 8 of the presidency, but it feels more like day 88. I mean, the amount of work that has been done by President Trump has been at electric speed, high speed, and we've seen it with strength, as you guys see. Also, before I move on, I do want to read a Truth Social post from Eli Crane that kind of sums it up with the way things have been going with President Trump. He said about 16 hours ago on Truth Social, President Trump has done more to advance American interests in 1 week than Biden's handlers did in 4 years. Isn't that the truth? So 88 days worth of work in 8 days, that's what it seems like. So that's what President Trump's up to with his team. So it's great to see that. Let's go over again, for those of you just joining us, for the Panama Canal hearing, which is led by the great Senator Ted Cruz out of Texas. So specifically, we're told the hearing will examine the importance of the Panama Canal to the American economy and our national security, focusing on its role in U.S. trade, the challenges of capacity limitations and rising fees, also the potential dangers posed by the involvement of China and other foreign powers. Again, a few facts and figures about the Panama Canal. Before we get to that, let's thank Brightcore, mybrightcore.com. Kimchi One, a great product that you see on the left side of your screen there. If you buy 2, you get 1 free. All you have to do is go to mybrightcore.com. This is a probiotic. This is something that's really going to help make you healthy again, right? So I interviewed the owner there, Kim Bright, of this product, and it's great to hear not only about the product, but about her background with health and her background and expertise of nutrition, and also being on Team MAGA and Team Maha. So a great combination there with Kim Bright, but also an absolutely awesome product there. So Kimchi One, that's the product. You see the bottle right there. These are capsules that you can take maybe 3 a day, morning, afternoon, night. It depends on what you'd like to do with that. But of course, go and learn more information by going to mybrightcore.com/RSBN. All right, so 9:18 Eastern time as we await this hearing that will start at 10 a.m. Again, programming note, 1 o'clock today, the first White House press briefing by Carolyn Leavitt will be at 1 o'clock Eastern, right here on Right Side. Also, this is the first one for President Trump's second administration, so this is going to be a lot of people watching this. And of course, we want to see how the press is going to handle this. Are they going to verbally attack? Are they going to ask really slanted questions? Most likely, the slanted questions, yes, but not based in truth and common sense. So we'll see. Maybe it'll be a friendly environment, which would be great. We need more of that in this country, as you guys know. So, all right, let's get back to the Panama Canal. So, again, 10 o'clock, Senator Ted Cruz. He talk about somebody that's sharp and can really get the job done. Senator Ted Cruz out of Texas. So the Panama Canal is a 51-mile man-made waterway. Of course, it connects the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. And if there was no Panama Canal, shipping around South America, that's 7,000-mile trek that it would take. So, you know, obviously it's great to have the Panama Canal there for shipping and global exports, imports, and foreign trade, all that. But the problem is, President Trump says our country is being ripped off by Panama over the 1977 Canal Treaty, which he says is a foolish giveaway from the Carter administration. So, again, Senator Cruz saying serving 40% of U.S. seaborne container trade, the Panama Canal is vital to American economic and national security interests. So we'll hear more from the senator today at 10 o'clock. We'll have that live for you. Again, we'll have the press briefing at 1 o'clock as well. Also live today, in about 10 minutes, we'll be joined by RSBN host Christina Loren from Nashville, Tennessee, who will give us a live report about all of these executive orders that President Trump's been signing, specifically some recent ones just yesterday at the event in Doral, Florida, in Miami. So she'll break that down for you, and we also have some sound from the president from yesterday. So just in about 10 minutes from now, we'll go to Nashville and be joined by Christina Loren for that live report. Speaking of other hosts, of course, Robert McNeely, he'll be here in studio with me tomorrow through the week as we cover a lot of hearings, Senate confirmation hearings for RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and also, you know, we may not be able to air every one of them. We might, but we know this, Kash Patel, we're airing that one in its entirety, as that's a huge one. But all of them really are. So we're going to air as many as we can here at the network, but we're glad you're with us to watch all of this live streaming. And that's why it's called RSBN Live. We just see what's happening, we bring it to you, and that's it. So it's always good to just have what's happening there. And we saw some comments on Truth Social where people are saying, thank you, RSBN, for not talking through when there's a moment like when yesterday Vice President J.D. Vance was in Virginia, in Damascus, walking and touring the area. You know, we stayed quiet when, of course, he was speaking with the Governor Glenn Youngkin. And it's the same thing with President Trump when he was in LA the other day with the First Lady. we're not going to talk over that. Now, sometimes there's a time to do that, but a large percentage of the time, we're going to show you and just let you feel like what it's there. You can see it, you can hear it, you can witness it in real time. There's no spin, there's no false agenda. It's just kind of, hey, here's what's going on. Let's toss to it and enjoy. So same thing with today's hearing. We're going to be going to that hearing at 10 a.m. and then, of course, later for the 1 o'clock press briefing as well. Again, 8 minutes from now, RSBN's Christina Loren will join us live here at the network. Always great to see her. Always great to see Robert. Always great to see everybody at the network as we move forward covering America First News and any breaking news as well. Yesterday, a couple smaller breaking news stories were happening while we were covering various events, including a 3.8 magnitude earthquake off of the coast of New England. Even Boston felt some of the shakes there, and so did Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So whenever we get those kind of stories, if there's major breaking news, we have the ability, of course, here at the network to tap into a live feed that we have an agreement with, that we're able to have that live picture, especially from the U.S. Capitol, which is reminding me of Monday, January 20th. This is exactly what the morning looked like on January 20th, just the other day. Again, it seems like it was 3 years ago that President Trump was sworn in as the 47th Commander-in-Chief. 8 days into the office here. It's January 28th, feeling like 88 days. So we're going to the next thing here. We could pivot again back to our Trump on Truth segment, as if you're just joining us, President Trump talking about the Southern California wildfires, saying the United States military just entered the great state of California and under emergency powers turned on the water flowing abundantly from the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The days of putting a fake environmental argument over the people are over, as you see from the post there. Enjoy the water, California. This is from President Trump within the past 10 hours or so. President Trump posting that on Truth Social. Another great sponsor here at the network, angelpaste.com, angelpaste.com. If you want to get 10% off of this product, a great gift, by the way, for Valentine's Day coming up, and now would be a great time to get it so it's there on time. Angelpaste.com. Use the RSBN promo code for 10% off of this product. And also out of Spring, Texas, hiring military veterans, an all-around great patriotic company with a great product. All you have to do is go to angelpaste.com for more information, but also there are other products on there as well. So go ahead and check it out when you get a chance. And if you'd like to make a purchase for Valentine's Day, great product right there, angelpaste.com. 9:24 Eastern Time. And Matthew Alvarez, thanks so much for waking up with us, especially for those of you on the West Coast, 6:24 in the morning, as we are getting ready to go to Capitol Hill for a hearing on the Panama Canal. This is a hearing that Senator Ted Cruz of Texas is leading to talk about our national interest of the possible control transfer of the Panama Canal. We'll see what happens. President Trump definitely is looking to have the Panama Canal back into the United States ownership. So we'll see how that goes, that hearing today at 10. And then also at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, the first press briefing from the White House with Carolyn Leavitt. We'll see how the press handles this. Are they going to be trying to do any gotcha, slanted, false narrative questions, or is it going to be a pleasant back and forth? We'll see. So this is definitely something that all of us that are interested in national events, world events, domestic events, policy, and also the left-wing media versus someone and the entire administration more based in the Constitution and also freedom for our country and making America great again, which I wish everybody was on that page, but you can't always get what you want. Sometimes you can. But anyway, so approaching 9:30 right now. We're getting ready for our live host, RSBN's Christina Loren from Nashville, talking about the executive orders. President Trump, again, not stopping. He's signing executive order after executive order, but they're all positive for our country. So she's going to give us an update on a number of EOs that were talked about just yesterday by the president, and will be signing them or already signed them But the point is, these are great, of course, for our military, but we'll get to more of that in just a minute here. Again, if you're just joining us, this is going to be a live hearing at the Senate for the Panama Canal. So specifically, the hearing will examine the importance of the Panama Canal to the American economy and our national interests. So that is great to see what kind of statements are made at this hearing, led again by Senator Ted Cruz. That again starts at 10, and we're getting ready for the 1 o'clock a bit later today for the first press briefing. So saw that on a White House email this morning, and I know that Robert and I were talking about it yesterday, looking forward to seeing something like this. So it's going to be great to see right here on Right Side Broadcasting Network. Again, it's 9:27, getting to be the bottom of the hour. The hearing expected to start at 10 a.m. And of course, this week, speaking of hearings and the Senate, a lot of confirmation hearings this week. RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and also Kash Patel. So Kash Patel for the FBI. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, for DNI, the Department of National Intelligence, RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services, and also Kelly Loeffler for the Small Business Administration. 4 huge appointments for great people and for our nation. So looking forward to seeing that here and looking forward to bringing you that live coverage with RSBN host Robert McNeely and myself, of course, Matthew Alvarez. All of it brought to you by some great sponsors, including Colonial Metals Group. The owner there, Paul Stone, appeared on the network not too long ago, and we'll be interviewing him again shortly. But this group here has what it takes when it comes to providing all that you need for financial peace of mind, especially for those in retirement years, but also for those that have some extra savings, diversifying, and also maybe even those that don't have a big savings account, just kind of looking to the future of what to do with some extra money, because gold as a backup to the IRA or 401k, a great idea, always having a high value, gold does. So all you have to do is go to freegoldguide.com/RSBN. You'll get all the information you need, freegoldguide.com/RSBN. You also see that QR code on your screen. If you'd like to, I'll give you a second there if you want to pull out the phone and go to the photo album and try and take a photo. Obviously, that little yellow thing will show up, and most likely I think it's freegoldguide.com. I'm about to do it here with you on the screen. But again, it's freegoldguide.com. A great sponsor here at Right Side Broadcasting Network as we get ready to go to Capitol Hill at 10 o'clock. Before we do that, we're going to go to RSBN's Christina Loren in Nashville. As soon as she is joining us live, we'll be going to her for a report on, again, President Trump's executive orders, new ones that he just talked about less than 24 hours ago in Doral, Florida yesterday at the Trump National Doral. He was meeting, of course, with the GOP Leadership Conference, so it was great to see him there and rallying the troops, figuratively. So it was great to see that. Speaking of troops, if you want to look again, we have a photo from the Department of Defense as we shift our focus to the national emergency on the southern border. The Department of Defense says on their specific .gov, their .mil website, this photo is right there. I'll explain what we're seeing here. We know that 1,600 active duty personnel from the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marine Corps have deployed to the southern border to augment the approximately 2,500 service members already deployed, supplying and supporting our U.S. Customs and Border Protection's southern border mission, which, of course, from the executive order from President Trump, that it is a national emergency on the southern border. So I knew that it was the Marines that were down there. I did not know that the U.S. Army as well. So the Army and the Marines on the southern border taking care of business there for our country. And it was on day one, at just a few minutes after President Trump was sworn in, that the Customs and Border Protection, the ZBP1 app, was closed down right away. That was under the other administration, and it was basically making it a lot easier for people just to come into the country. Well, that was shut down on day one, and we're seeing a lot of ICE deportations happening throughout the country. We are seeing right now they're specifically going after those with criminal connections. So that's the I believe I've seen the numbers out there. I'm not going to quote the number right now. I'd rather double check it before I do, but a lot of people. So they're taking care of that, and then they shift out to more of illegal aliens throughout the country. Now, speaking of illegal aliens, that is the term of the government here in the United States. On other networks, some of the anchors will correct even their own reporters for saying illegal aliens, which is ridiculous because it's the truth. That's what the people are called. Now, immigrants in this country, my grandpa was from Cuba. I'm glad that we are citizens of this nation and are here legally, and it's wonderful. So obviously that's welcomed in this country. However, illegal immigration, of course, is not, as you know, preaching to the choir. So anyway, so that's what's going on the southern border as it's 9:32 a.m. as we get ready to go to Christina Loren in Nashville for a great report. And we're about to go there to her in just a minute. And she'll share with us again more about, speaking of troops and military, about various things going on there in the country for the executive orders. Christina, can you hear me?
I can. Good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning to you. How is Nashville, Tennessee?
You know, it's going to be a beautiful day, high around 58 degrees. So finally, a lot of us are going to be able to leave hibernation and get outdoors and enjoy the sunshine.
Exactly. Good. That'll be great to see that. Also, we know that the president yesterday spoke a lot about executive orders, and I believe there were more than two. There's a number of them that he was talking about. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, you know, he did. And he really focused in on the military, which is something that I think he was waiting for Pete Hegseth to be confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense, the leader of the Pentagon, before really pushing what he has in store for our American military. But what's so interesting about President Trump is he's completely transparent. And so many of the things that he promised us on the campaign trail, we're seeing them come to fruition now with these executive orders. And for America to continue to move in the right direction, what we need more than anything is a strong, cohesive military to protect the American people and our homeland, because we don't just protect our own people, we protect democracy across the globe. As Commander-in-Chief, President Trump recognizes the responsibility that comes with leading the world's most powerful force, the most powerful military in the world. And he made rebuilding America's armed forces a cornerstone of his presidential campaign. He talked about it at every single Trump rally that I attended, every single speech that I watched. He always talks about the significance of the U.S. military. Now, unfortunately, we're coming off of 4 years of neglect, misdirection, and of course, poor leadership under President Joe Biden. So to hear how President Trump is not just boosting morale in the armed forces, we're seeing a record number of recruits now signing up after critically low numbers in recruitment during President Joe Biden's leadership. That's a great sign. But also to know that he's strengthening the protection of the American people with the help of the U.S. military is amazing. And he talked yesterday a lot about the Iron Dome. Now, an Iron Dome is essentially a system that uses a sophisticated radar to detect incoming airborne threats. So it can detect drones and missiles, ballistic, hypersonic, even cruise missiles. Now, once a threat is identified, the system launches a guided interceptor missile to neutralize the incoming projectile midair, and it minimizes the damage on the ground. Now, Israel has had this technology since 2011, and they were able to take out 90% of the rockets with the Iron Dome. Now, I don't know if this is the case, but Israel is our ally. And so will they be sharing that intel with us? I do believe so. I think that's going to help us get it off the ground a lot faster than we would have seen otherwise. And as tensions with Iran and China remain high, not to mention the fact that we're seeing more sophisticated technology with some of these terrorist organizations, the timing could not be better. I mean, we saw the drones over New Jersey. We still don't have any answers as to who they were from, what they were doing. And I know President Trump probably knows something, but there's a reason why he's keeping that information to himself. This is something we're not going to have to wait on either. He went ahead yesterday and said that we're going to get the Iron Dome done immediately. And within 60 days' time, the Secretary of Defense shall submit an implementation plan for the next generation missile defense system. And so he is not going to sit around and just talk about this. This is something that he's actively engaged in. And probably today, I would imagine that Pete Hegseth is busy getting everything together for the Iron Dome. Now, let's talk a little bit about wokeness, because President Donald J. Trump is taking a bad rap for the mainstream media because he wants to do away with wokeness in the military. Well, putting an end to wokeness in the military is key because our servicemen and women, they need to be able to execute complex operations cohesively in high pressure situations. Wokeness is all about drawing attention to individual perceived social injustices. It's all about the individual. There's no place for it in the military. It can serve as a significant distraction, undermining focus and unity. I mean, you think about the very uniform itself. The military uniform is a sign of unity. And when our servicemen and women sign up, they are all well aware of the fact that you're giving up your personal identity in order to be part of the greater good. And so there really is no room for wokeness in our United States military. Now that President Trump is at the helm as commander-in-chief of our great military, he's demonstrated that he wants to be the best that he can be. He wants to protect our servicemen and women. He wants them to be able to execute with minimal risk. And more importantly, he knows that when you have strong foreign policy and a strong U.S. military, the threats from foreign adversaries will go way down. In fact, if you look at history, the greatest times of peace in this country have occurred when we had both of those things. Now, the partisan mainstream media, like I said, they're going to try to say that this is discrimination, but it's not. It's about military readiness and military effectiveness, which are both very important to our commander-in-chief. Our military is the greatest fighting force that the world has ever known and likely ever will know, as long as we maintain our leadership here in America. We fight for other countries' freedom. We know that China and Xi Jinping has said that he wants to be dominant by the year 2049. Well, with President Trump at the helm, that becomes less and less likely as the days go by. We are so grateful to those of you who have sacrificed for this country, just signing up for the military, whether you were deployed or not. We thank our great servicemen and women who have served this country and put themselves second in order to lift our country up, fighting for our families and our freedom. I want to thank everybody who's ever served. You are the pride of this nation. And just like President Donald J. Trump, at RSBN, we stand with you. Matthew, back to you.
For that live report. Also, the information from yesterday's great message from the president. I believe you do have that soundbite, as well as we know that he spoke about a number of executive orders yesterday.
Rolled out as time goes by. It's hard to even keep up. I checked my email box at 10:35 last night, and everything I read pertained to the military. And so we'll just have to wait and see what goes on from here. But I'm so proud to live in this country at this time and to be part of this movement that is going to shape not just America, but the entire world going forward. So I'm really happy with the direction that the country is going in. And President Trump is hard to keep up with. He even squeezed in 2 rounds of golf over the last couple of days as well, while signing these executive orders. And, you know, he dealt with the situation that was happening in Colombia. He executed great force by letting them know that he's not going to play games. Anybody who tries to cross him, anybody who tries to get in the way of his America First agenda, there will be repercussions to play. And I know AOC, she sent out a tweet saying something to the effect of, oh, your coffee is going to be so much more expensive because it comes from Colombia. Well, we don't even have to worry about that because President Trump did what he had to do. He got the situation resolved quickly, and he sent a great message to countries like China and Iran. Anybody else who wants to mess with us, there will be repercussions to pay place. So I'm just really proud of him. But yeah, he's hard to keep up with, Matthew.
Yeah, no, 100%. You know, this is 8 days into the presidency. It seems like 88 days, Christina. So thank you again for joining us from Nashville, Tennessee. RSBN's Christina Loren, thank you again.
Thank you. I love watching you. I'm going to keep you on all day. Have a great day, Matthew.
You too. Thank you. So Christina Loren, of course, they're live in Nashville, Tennessee, talking about those executive orders. And we'll go to some of that sound from just yesterday in a minute. And to her point, the peace through strength that President Trump has for many nations, all nations, really. I mean, that's really his posture, wanting killing to stop, not wanting to start any new wars ever. So at the end of the day, we know, though, that the drug cartels are now listed as a terrorist organization. So they need to back off, and realize who's in charge now. It's strength and common sense, leadership, not weakness and wokeness. So let's go to yesterday real quick. We were talking about the 4 executive orders that President Trump is now signing into law.
Begin the construction of a state-of-the-art Iron Dome missile defense shield, which will be able to protect Americans. You know, we protect other countries, but we don't protect ourselves. And when Ronald Reagan wanted to do it many years ago, luckily we didn't. We didn't have the technology then. It was a concept, but we didn't. And now we have phenomenal technology. You see that with Israel, where out of 319 rockets, they knocked down just about every one of them. So I think the United States is entitled to that, and everything will be made right here in the USA, 100%. And next, to ensure that we have the most lethal fighting force in the world, we will get transgender ideology the hell out of our military. It's going to be gone. In addition, we will stop our service members from being indoctrinated with radical left ideologies such as critical race theory. We're going to stop it. It's already been stopped. It's already been halted, totally halted. And finally, we will offer full reinstatement to any service member who was expelled from the armed forces due to the COVID vaccine mandate. And we will restore them to their former rank with full pay. And I think we're going to have a lot of people that join. And one thing I'll say, if you looked at our recruitment over the last week or so, 2 weeks, it's through the roof.
Being restored, if not restored already, for our country. So we'll get to some specifics about the southern border in just a second. If you're just joining us right now, this is RSBN Live as we're getting ready to go to Washington, D.C. for a hearing led by Senator Ted Cruz about the Panama Canal. Before we move on, let's go to angelpaste.com, a great gift for Valentine's Day around the corner. Right there, you see it on your screen. There's also other products at angelpaste.com. If you use the RSBN promo code, you get 10% off. Always good to use the RSBN promo code and always good to save some money. So angelpaste.com, a great product there. Again, there are other products as well. This group based and headquartered in Spring, Texas, hiring military veterans. So a great Patriot type group right there, including Tax Network USA. So 800-357-1415 for more information on everything when it comes to taxes. If you missed some taxes over the years, or if you have any questions for the upcoming tax cycle, that number right there on the left side of your screen, 800-357-1415, a great number to call, or if you'd like to go online, tnusa.com/RSBN. All right, so the White House schedule has been released for the day. At 11 a.m., the president will receive his daily intelligence briefing, so in about an hour and 15 minutes from now. At 1 o'clock, the first White House press briefing will take place for the second Trump administration. That will be in the James Brady press briefing room there in Washington. Quite interesting. We'll see how that goes. I know it'll go great from the perspective of the administration because they're standing on common sense. We'll see what happens with the fake news media and how that will happen. Maybe it'll be a friendly environment. Who knows? And then, of course, in about 15 minutes from now, we'll go to Capitol Hill for Senator Ted Cruz's hearing on the Panama Canal and the specifics about American trade and our national interests. A great Panama Canal event coming up. Okay. We're also hearing, we're getting the Department of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's official portrait is being released. So we'll be showing that to you as well. If you remember just yesterday with Robert McNeely and myself, the First Lady Melania Trump had the first, the official portrait was released by the Office of the First Lady. Quite an awesome photo. So was our Commander-in-Chief, President Trump, and our Vice President, J.D. Vance. I still think it's going to be great when you go to any kind of government agency, say you're just going to get your license renewed, or you're at a state DOT somewhere, and you look up and you see the American flag standing right there, and you see the photo of President Trump. You know the guy means business, and that's what's great, because he's fighting for each and every one of us Americans, regardless of what political affiliation. The president of the entire country, and somebody that did great things in the first administration, so we're looking for the same in the second, and we know already great things are happening right now. Those are the facts. If there's anything different to report, we'll let you know, but we're just going to report what's going on here at Right Side Broadcasting Network. We'll be right back.
Hey y'all, it's Silk from the Diamond and Silk Chit Chat live show. Look, don't forget to check me out right here on RSBN Network. Be sure to watch the show on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and I want you to support Right Side Broadcasting Network. Yes, it's imperative that you do so, okay? I look to see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
A large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving us with a ton of extra MyPillows. But you know what? That's their loss. I'm going to make it your gain. For the first time ever, you get standard classic MyPillows for wholesale prices, only $14.88. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.88. But it gets even better. For a limited time, I'm going to offer my entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Upgrade to a queen size MyPillow for just $18.88. King size only $1 more. Get my body pillows for $29.88 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.88. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on the screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever on TV, including my standard size MyPillow, only $14.88. They've never been offered this low before. We have limited quantities at this price, so limit's going to be 10, and once they're gone, they're gone.
Welcome to Right Side Broadcasting Network, your trusted conservative news outlet. At RSBN, we deliver the truth when the mainstream media falls short. Since 2015, we've proudly broadcasted every single one of President Trump's iconic MAGA rallies, bringing you the excitement and energy live before anyone else. By watching RSBN, you get an unfiltered front row view of the action on the ground. We interview the crowds to give a voice to millions of Americans just like you. We show you President Trump's speeches in their entirety, free from interruptions and censorship. We cover the stories that matter to you with the integrity and passion you deserve. Thank you for choosing RSBN as your home for America First News. Together, we stand strong, united, and informed. So join us and be part of the right side of history.
Welcome back to RSBN Live. You're looking at the official portrait of the Department of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. A solid photo there, and it's always great to have someone that is solid leading such an important group over at the Pentagon. The entire U.S. military, when it comes to second in charge, as President Trump, of course, is the commander-in-chief. And Pete Hegseth, the official portrait from the Department of Defense, as he has been officially since Friday, the Secretary of Defense there in the Pentagon. Quite an awesome accomplishment by Pete Hegseth. And it's great to have a true patriot leading our military from the Pentagon. It was quite something back in 2005. I was an intern at one of the cable outlets, and there was a press briefing at the Pentagon, and walked the halls there in the E-ring of the Pentagon and saw, at the time, Secretary Rumsfeld. And it's just quite the massive building, of course, as you guys have seen from just the outside. But now he is the top guy. He's the guy in charge there. Speaking of military, let's actually shift past the Trump on Truth segment. We'll go back to that in a second. Let's go to what's happening on our southern border. From the Department of Defense, we're seeing that 1,600 active duty personnel from the U.S. Army and the Marines. I thought originally it was just the Marines there, but that would be fine if it was. But it's the Marines and the Army there working in tandem, being deployed to the southern border to augment the approximately 2,500 service members already deployed supporting U.S. Customs and Border Protection's southern border mission. So great to see that information. That's specifically from the government website of the Department of Defense. the Pentagon. So those stats are coming directly from there, that photo directly from there. You can go check it out too if you'd like. But I saw that yesterday on various Truth Social accounts, including Real Toria Brooke and others. But also still, you go right to the source there at the Department of Defense. There's a great photo there of them shoring up the border wall. And it'll be great to see the construction of the border wall happening too, and continuing to finish that wall as the president has promised the nation. And we voted for something like that to happen through voting for the president. So looking forward to seeing that. Producer, can you repeat, please? Okay, let's go to Colonial Metals Group. Colonial Metals Group. If you missed it earlier, we did do an interview with the owner, Paul Stone, at Colonial Metals Group. It's on our Rumble page and elsewhere, so if you'd like to check it out. But also, we'll be interviewing Paul in a bit as well, a little bit later in the month, actually next month. But it's great to hear from the owner, founder of the various sponsors, just to see where they're coming from. They've got great products, but it's awesome to see that they are also based patriots here in the country. So all you have to do is go to freegoldguide.com and go check it out, because think about it. The financial peace of mind in itself is worth checking it out, but the 401k and the tax sheltered IRA backed in high value gold, always a great thing. So Colonial Metals Group, freegoldguide.com. As we are about 7 minutes away from going to Capitol Hill for Senator Ted Cruz and the Senate there to talk about various things, including what you see on the screen right there. This is all about the Panama Canal, the fees and foreign influence, examining the Panama Canal and its impact on U.S. trade and national security. Again, that coverage to begin at 10 o'clock. I didn't forget about the Trump on Truth segment, which if you've been watching since the start of the broadcast 53 minutes ago, we've covered this a few times, but I think it's important because we saw the coverage with RSBN host Robert McNeely and myself here in the studio on Friday from Los Angeles. The president talking about Southern California, saying, quote, as soon as I get to it here on the iPad, let's read it together on the TV. How about it? The United States military just entered the great state of California and under emergency powers turned on the water flowing abundantly from the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The days of putting a fake environmental argument are over. The people are over. The people are over. Enjoy the water, California. So great to see that being done. The president knowing exactly what to do, especially after traveling to LA and getting the intel that he needs. And he was even getting those reports before even traveling there, but being there with the people and then actually so-called taking on, in a way, the local officials in Los Angeles. We know that many are very left-leaning, but at the end of the day, this is about life, and we're trying to get things restored and taken care of in Southern California. So President Trump and the First Lady made that trip on Friday, as you saw. Not to forget the first trip to Western North Carolina for Hurricane Helene aftermath, even though that was months ago. And then on top of that, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, going yesterday to Virginia and Damascus, also regarding Hurricane Helene aftermath. So reporting exactly what's happening here at Right Side Broadcasting Network. Again, this is RSBN Live. Thanks so much for streaming in. Speaking of streaming in, 1 o'clock today, Eastern Time, the first White House press briefing with Carolyn Leavitt, the press secretary, will happen in Washington, D.C., the first one for the second President Trump administration. We'll have that live right here on Right Side Broadcasting Network on our various channels that you can watch us, including the great Rumble. Rumble, obviously, if you follow our channel on there, you can see our live coverage as well. So many of you, of course, watching on that even now. So great to see you. Hello. As we're about 5 minutes away from going to that Senate committee hearing on the Panama Canal. Again, you can see it says it right there, the fees and foreign influence, examining the Panama Canal and its impact on U.S. trade and national security. All right, let's go to Tax Network USA, 800-357-1415 for more information on Tax Network USA. If you've missed any back taxes, have any questions coming up, the financial peace of mind that you get by working with these guys is perfect. So go to tnusa.com/RSBN, get the information you need, and work on just getting those back taxes taken care of. And speaking of the IRS, the IRS head has resigned, and also President Trump talking about the 88,000 IRS agents, hired under the Biden administration, well, they're all getting shifted over to something else. Definitely not doing that. They may even go to the southern border. The president, I would say, quipped on Saturday. He talked about that. So is that actually going to happen? We'll see. So 800-357-1415. So you got to pay taxes. That's part of what we do here in the country. Of course, it'd be great if we didn't have any taxes to pay, but obviously we do. So 800-357-1415. Let's also go to Brightcore, mybrightcore.com. Kimchi One, great product, left side of your screen. You can get two of them. Actually, you get if you get two of them, you get one free. Always a good product, especially probiotics. Kimchi, if you do a little bit of research on it, this is actually really good for your health. So make America healthy again, and also it's great that the owner, Kim Bright, is all about MAGA as well, so make America great again. 888-722-0936. One more sponsor here for you, Colonial Metals Group. freegoldguide.com. freegoldguide.com is the place to go for the free info kit on Colonial Metals Group. Gold backed in an IRA or a 401k, great financial peace of mind there as well. We're approaching the top of the hour here on Right Side Broadcasting Network. Thanks so much for streaming in wherever you're watching. We're going to go to the right of your screen and take that full as soon as that hearing starts. Again, Senator Ted Cruz to discuss various things about the Panama Canal. Let's go with some specifics on that. As we know, the Panama Canal, a very crucial part of the earth for trade. Just imagine if there was no Panama Canal. They'd have to take the ships 7,000 miles all the way underneath from this down below South America, from the Atlantic to the Pacific or vice versa. Now we have this 51-mile man-made canal, of course, from back in the early 1900s. But still, specifically, Senator Cruz said, upon announcing this hearing that you're about to see, serving 40% of U.S. seaborne container trade, the Panama Canal is vital to American economic and national security interests. The United States paid for and built the Panama Canal, but Panama is treating America unfairly, this according to Senator Ted Cruz, and ceding control of key infrastructure to China. So we're going to see more about the national interests there and the impact on U.S. trade. That happens in about 120 seconds from now, if it happens right on time. We'll be going to Capitol Hill, and we'll have that entire hearing live for you from the Senate. Now, also, again, in a separate streaming event will be the 1 o'clock press conference from the press briefing room right off the West Wing of the White House, where Carolyn Leavitt will make her debut as press secretary. Obviously, she working with MAGA and the whole team at the Trump, campaign trail as a spokesperson, doing an absolutely great job, and then appearing on various networks as well. And anchors and reporters would try and do gotcha questions, but here's the thing: if there was something to get you on, there's not. If there's truth and common sense and things that are really trying to help our country, that's what we're into, and that's what we're covering here. It happens to be that President Trump is also doing that for the nation. So you got to stick with truth. So we're looking forward to seeing that as it is now 10 o'clock on the East Coast. Top of the hour, getting ready to go to Capitol Hill. We have a lot of coverage coming up this week as well. RSBN host Robert McNeely will join me in studio tomorrow through Friday, as tomorrow and Thursday will be a lot of Senate confirmation hearings, anywhere from Kelly Loeffler for the Small Business Administration to Tulsi Gabbard with DNI, the Department of National Intelligence, and then, of course, RFK Jr. with Human and Health Services, or Health and Human Services, and then Kash Patel for the top job at the FBI. So quite the week of news. That 24/7 news cycle that we talked about back in rally days, is ramping up. It ramped up then, it's ramping up now, and if there's any rallies to cover, of course, this is your one-stop shop for all of that. Live event coverage right here on RSBN Live. Again, I'm Matthew Alvarez. Thank you so much for streaming in as we get ready to go to the Senate chamber there, or the Senate hearing room in one of the buildings there, as we get ready for this Panama Canal discussion about the impact on U.S. trade and also for national security. If you're just joining us right now, a number of headlines that we're following, including seeing reports that The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, will travel to Washington next week to meet with President Trump. We're seeing that through various reports. We'll have that live, of course, here at the network. And then, of course, we also heard, and many of you may know, that President Trump has been invited by Speaker Mike Johnson to address a joint session of Congress on March 4th. So that'll be quite the speech and quite the national coverage we'll have here at the network. We know that, again, the president has signed a number of new executive orders to strengthen our military. He talked about that yesterday at the GOP Leadership Conference in Doral at his golf club there. So it was great to see that. We had that live coverage on the network. So if you'd like to pass the link around to friends and family, especially, if you're at work and you're able to watch, on the side, I won't tell anybody, but you know what I mean. Obviously got to do your work and work hard in this country. But the point is, if you do have a break or if you want to watch the replay, you can watch it on Rumble or you can watch it on various social platforms here at the network. Just the coverage, it's ongoing. So it's, as they say in media, right? And I've worked in it for several years. It's a fluid situation, meaning this is a constant live breaking, developing situation. Well, with President Trump at the helm, this is like that on a constant basis. It really is. And if there are already times where there's a couple hours, we obviously are joined by several people here to interview at the network as we continue the narrative of truth. And that narrative is not a bad word. It's just used really poorly with when it's false narratives. But a narrative is pretty simple. It's the story of what's happening and the messaging and seeing the truth unfold with common sense. Let's go to Senator Ted Cruz in Washington right now.
Senator Moreno down there suggested we open the hearing by playing Van Halen and Panama. We may not do that, but between the American construction of the Panama Canal, the French effort to build an isthmus canal, and America's triumphant completion of that canal, the major infrastructure projects across Panama cost more than 35,000 lives. For the final decade of work on the Panama Canal, the United States spent nearly $400 million, equivalent to more than $15 billion today. The Panama Canal proved a truly invaluable asset, sparing both cargo ships and warships the long journey around South America. When President Carter gave it away to Panama, Americans were puzzled, confused, and many outraged. With the passage of time, many have lost sight of the canal's importance, both to national security and to the U.S. economy. Not President Trump. When he demanded fair treatment for American ships and goods, many in the media scoffed. But the Panama Canal was not just given away. President Carter struck a bargain. He made a treaty. And President Trump is making a serious and substantive argument that that treaty is being violated right now. This committee has jurisdiction under the Senate rules over the Panama Canal, and today we will examine evidence of potential violations. President Trump has highlighted two key issues. Number one, the danger of China exploiting or blocking passage through the canal. And number two, the exorbitant costs for transit. Chinese companies are right now building a bridge across the canal at a slow pace so as to take nearly a decade. And Chinese companies control container ports at either end. The partially completed bridge gives China the ability to block the canal without warning. And the ports give China ready observation posts to time that action. This situation, I believe, poses acute risks to U.S. national security. Meanwhile, the high fees for canal transit disproportionately affect Americans because U.S. cargo accounts for nearly 3/4 of canal transits. U.S. Navy vessels pay additional fees that apply only to warships. Canal profits regularly exceed $3 billion. This money comes from both American taxpayers and consumers in the form of higher costs for goods. American tourists aboard cruises, particularly those in the Caribbean Sea, are essentially captive to any fees Panama chooses to levy for canal transits. And they have paid unfair prices for fuel bunkering at terminals in Panama as a result of government-granted monopoly. Panama's government relies on these exploitative fees. Nearly 1/10 of its budget is paid for with canal profit. As those fees cascade through the American economy and the federal fisc, the Chinese Communist Party advances its global economic contest against the United States and takes a militaristic interest in the canal. While President Trump has rightly focused on these key issues, there are additional problems. In the last 2 years, the Canal Authority generated record revenue even while transits were depressed by drought conditions. And the only comfort to delayed and overcharged ships is that Panama may invest in more freshwater reserves in the future. Even as it takes advantage of the global maritime system, Panama has emerged as a bad actor. Panama has for years flagged dozens of vessels in the Iranian Ghost Fleet, which brought Iran tens of billions of dollars in oil profits to fund terror across the world. And Chinese companies have won contracts, often without fair competition, as the infamous Belt and Road Initiative has come to Panama. China often engages in debt trap diplomacy to enable economic and political coercion. In Panama, it also seems to have exploited simple corruption. We have 4 panelists with us today. At Ranking Member Cantwell's request, we also invited the Deputy Administrator of the Panama Canal to appear today. She declined that invitation. I understand this witness claimed her absence was due to a scheduling matter, but I also recognize that defending the Panama Canal Authority is an unenviable task. This committee may be obliged to compel her testimony at a future hearing. It will not escape senators' notice that Professor Kontorovich is appearing virtually today. That will be a very unusual practice before this committee. The professor was ready to fly from Israel to D.C. to appear in person, but he was unable to because too few American carriers have resumed direct flights to Israel. While European airliners are willing to fly to Israel, service to America has been prohibitively long and expensive. Israel is America's closest ally in the Middle East, and U.S. carriers are refusing to fly there. Late last week, Delta Airlines announced it would finally restart direct flights to Tel Aviv in April. And I very much hope that United Airlines and American Airlines will very quickly follow suit and resume direct flights to Israel. Turning back to the topic at hand, I'm grateful to President Trump for raising public awareness about the state of the Panama Canal and the threats to American interests. We cannot afford to let American shippers be extorted. We cannot turn a blind eye if Panama exploits an asset of vital commercial and military importance, and we cannot stay idle while China is on the march in our hemisphere. I expect and hope the testimony today to enlighten on all of those issues. I will now turn to Ranking Member Cantwell for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this important hearing and the witnesses that are here today and virtually. Access to the Panama Canal is essential. Maintaining America's supply chains, lowering inflation cost on consumers and goods, and ensuring our national security. With about 72% of the goods transiting the canal coming to or from U.S. markets, a stable waterway is vital for states like mine, where 1 in 4 jobs are related directly or indirectly to trade. Seattle-based SSA Marine, operated in the Manzillo International Terminal in Cologne, Panama for the last 30 years, is our largest U.S. logistics presence in Panama, with 19 massive cranes, 3.5 million cargo containers, and employing over 1,000 people. In fact, Washington's maritime economy supports 170,000 jobs and $45 billion in revenue, and our U.S. maritime economy supports over 21 million jobs and almost $3 trillion in America's GDP. So anything that our committee can do to help grow our maritime economy, I'm all for. That is why it's so important that the committee not just focus on Panama, but the broader solutions to meet our U.S. maritime opportunities and challenges. This committee passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, led by our colleagues, Senator Klobuchar and Senator Thune to address shipping costs and stop carriers from practices that delayed U.S. cargo or increased costs. This law also gave the FMC, our two commissioners that are here today, the ability to do better investigation. So I look forward to hearing about their investigation on the Panama Canal and these cost issues. And many members of this committee have worked on the infrastructure bill to do dock replacements in places like Alaska, rail improvements, pier infrastructure, safety improvements, container yard expansion. And I know that my colleagues who represent these maritime investments need a maritime workforce and continued investment. Many of our colleagues, Mr. Chairman, have great ideas. Senator Kelly and Young from the Senate, Representatives Garamendi and Kelly from the House, and they've been working with maritime stakeholders on these larger bills. But Mr. Chairman, if this committee doesn't embrace this larger agenda, it's going to get decided in the Finance Committee. So I hope that we can get some of these issues and show that this committee is the committee for maritime jurisdiction. A bill that provides a comprehensive strategy to rebuild America's supply chain supremacy, sea left capacity that we need to defend our interests in the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific region, and to revitalize our nation's ports and shipbuilding capacity. A revitalized U.S. maritime strategy would not only be good for our economy, but critical for national security. At the same time, we face cyber threats from our foreign adversaries, and Panama is a perfect example, which brings us to the hearing today. I am concerned about Chinese-owned ports in Panama and their proximity to the canal. I'm also deeply concerned about the installation of Chinese equipment from Huawei and Chinese companies near the canal. This is why this committee successfully worked to get $3 billion in rip and replace at the end of last Congress. So if we're trying to get them out of U.S. ports and areas, we shouldn't certainly allow them in vessels and back doors in places like Panama. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the two most recent U.S. ambassadors to Panama who make the case for continued U.S. investment in infrastructure and cybersecurity.
Without objection.
These ambassadors, thank you, Mr. Chairman, these ambassadors know better than anyone that America's adversaries have built backdoors into communication technology, software, supply chains, both software and hardware. So whether it's a crane over the port or a bridge, we cannot tolerate Huawei, TikTok, artificial intelligence, or other adversaries using a government backdoor. Mr. Chairman, I'm a very big fan of the five biggest technology interests and basic democracies forming a technology NATO. We should be saying to the world, nobody should be buying technology or equipment that has a government backdoor. These are complex issues, and we need solutions. I will be requesting that the Department of Defense provide a classified briefing to all members of our committee about foreign adversary threats to the Panama Canal, including these adjacent areas. I received an initial classified briefing from the U.S. Southern Command and have spoken to former U.S. Southern Command leader, General Laura Richardson, on these issues. I also plan to go as a delegation or by myself to Panama and visit the Panama Canal Authority. I invite other members to do so, hopefully this spring. Any successful strategy also has to not just focus on cybersecurity and cooperation, and we'll ask some of our witnesses here today, but the larger issue is we need to understand what are the shortfalls of the current agreement that doesn't get at this upgraded technology concern. I would hope that Panama would be very cooperative in discussing these cybersecurity investments and what needs to be made. As we all know, the Panama Canal is, as an authority, independent, and the Chinese government don't start the shipping rates, but the authority has been grappling with historic rainfalls, climate change, and the solution, I believe, is for us to work together, as the Army Corps did before, on solutions in making sure that instability in water is not the cause of increase in rates. We need to work on these solutions. But, Mr. Chairman, I also believe that the larger issue here, as you mentioned in your statement about Belt and Road initiatives by the Chinese and their expansion, needs to be met with an aggressive response by the United States. I firmly believe in trade. But again, easy for me to say, or maybe for Texas, when you're coming from a very trade-dependent state. But the issue is we didn't have an ambassador there for 5 years in Panama. For all my colleagues who hold up ambassadors, you should rethink your strategies when you do this, because holding up ambassadors and not dealing with these issues put us behind the 8 ball. Expanding exports to 95% of the world's consumers and roughly 3.5 billion people, I believe, is a good idea. I hope we can have a more aggressive strategy in Latin America. I think the proposals by Senator Cassidy and Bennett, the Americas Act, is an also like-minded thing of Latin American countries that we could join together in sort of a U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade agreement. And I also believe that a free trade agreement of the Americas that link modernization of all our FTAs in Latin America and the Caribbean would help, along with an aggressive strategy on saying no government backdoors and making the kind of investments that the Export-Import Bank can do to counter China. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for organizing this important hearing. Such investments ensure resilient supply chains, boost exports, lower consumer costs, and most importantly, protect our national security. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Our first witness today is Chairman Luis Sola of the Federal Maritime Commission. He was recently in Panama on a fact-finding mission and can speak to concerning developments that I noted in my opening statement. Chairman Sola, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the critical importance of the Panama Canal to U.S. trade and global commerce. I bring a unique perspective as someone who's not only served as a maritime regulator, but also lived and worked extensively in Panama. I have transited the Panama Canal over 100 times. This experience provides me with a profound understanding of the canal's significance and challenges it faces. Prolonged drought conditions last year forced operational changes, reducing transit slots, restricting vessel types, and auctioning of slots, raising alarm about its resilience. The Panama Canal is managed by the Panama Canal Authority, ACP, an independent agency of the Panamanian government. The ACP is a model of public infrastructure management, and its independence has been key to ensure a safe and reliable transit of vessels critical to the U.S. and global commerce. During my recent visit to Panama, I had the opportunity to meet with leaders of the ACP to better understand their efforts to address the ongoing challenges facing the canal. I saw firsthand their commitment to maintaining the canal's efficiency and resilience. These conversations also highlighted the broader challenges posed by the Panamanian government's maritime policies, which complicate the ACP's mission and raise concerns about corruption and foreign influence. In contrast, the broader maritime sector in Panama, including the nation's ports, water rights, and the world's largest ship registry, falls under the direct purview of the Panamanian government. Unfortunately, this sector has faced persistent challenges, including corruption scandals and foreign influence, particularly from Brazil and China. These issues create friction with the ACP, especially as it works to address long-term challenges, such as securing adequate water supplies for the canal. Although the ACP operates independently under U.S. law, both the ACP and the government of Panama's maritime sector are considered one and the same. This means that any challenges in Panama's maritime sector, including corruption, lack of transparency, or foreign influence, can have a direct or indirect impact on the operations and long-term stability of the canal. This legal perspective highlights the need for vigilance in monitoring both the ACP's management and Panama government's policies affecting maritime operations. Since 2015, Chinese companies have increased their presence and influence throughout Panama. Panama became a member of the Belt and Roads Initiative and ended its diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Chinese companies have been able to pursue billions of dollars in development contracts in Panama, many of which were projects directly on or adjacent to the Panama Canal. Many were no-bid contracts, labor laws were waived, and the Panamanian people are still waiting to see how they've been benefited. It is all more concerning that many of these companies are state-owned, and in some cases even designated as linked to the People's Liberation Army. We must address the significant growing presence and influence of China throughout the Americas and in Panama specifically. American companies should play a leading role in enhancing the canal's infrastructure. By supporting U.S. firms, we reduce reliance on Chinese contractors and promote fair competition. Additionally, confirming a U.S. ambassador in Panama is critical to advancing our national and economic interests. The FMC will continue to monitor the canal's pricing practices and consider broad reviews of Panama's maritime sector. The FMC has the authority to impose significant remedies, including fines and restrictions on Panamanian flag vessels entering U.S. ports. In closing, the Panama Canal is vital to our economy, with over 75% of its traffic bound for our ports. Safeguarding the ACP's independence and addressing the challenges posed by the broader government are essential to maintaining U.S. competitiveness in the global economy. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Our next witness is Commissioner Daniel Maffei of the Federal Maritime Commission. He was also in Panama with Chairman Sola. Mr. Maffei, I look forward to your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cruz and Ranking Member Cantwell and members of the committee. I do want to say that in addition to Chairman Sola and myself, Commissioner Max Vekich is also here from the Federal Maritime Commission, which I just think underscores the importance of this issue to us. More than 110 years after its opening, the Panama Canal does remain absolutely vital to maintaining resilient supply chains for both American importers and exporters. Because the canal is essentially a waterway bridge over mountainous terrain above sea level, it does depend on large supplies of fresh water to maintain the full operations. Panama has among the world's largest annual rainfalls. Nonetheless, insufficient freshwater levels have occurred before in the canal's history, such as in the 1930s when the Madden Dam and Lake Alajuela were built to address water shortages. Since that time, the canal has undertaken several projects to accommodate larger, more modern ships. In the last couple of years, a trend of worsening droughts in the region once again has forced limits to the operations of the canal. Starting in June of 2023, the Panama Canal Authority employed draft restrictions and reduced the number of ships allowed to transit the canal per day. Now, the Panama Canal limitations, in combination with the de facto closure of the Suez Canal to container traffic, has had serious consequences for ocean commerce, increasing rates, fees, and transit times. In the first half of 2024, U.S. importers and exporters expressed Panama Canal-related concerns to the FMC, including doubts about the future reliability of the canal and questions about how the Panama Canal Authority was determining which ships could transit the canal and how long they would have to wait. The FMC has statutory authority under the laws concerning foreign shipping practices to investigate and potentially take appropriate counteraction if it finds that a foreign country, through its laws or regulations, has contributed to, quote, conditions unfavorable to shipping in the foreign trade, unquote. Given this statutory mandate and consistent with FMC's mission, I and then Commissioner Luis Sola started to look deeper into the causes of the issues facing the canal. The first step was to meet with Panamanian officials and other stakeholders, as the chairman has pointed out, about the conditions adversely affecting the canal's operations, about what was being done to address these concerns, and about whether any aspect of the canal's operations might result in conditions unfavorable to U.S. shipping that should be addressed under the Commission's authority. So we traveled to Panama, actually it was in July of 2024, and we met with then recently elected President Jose Molino and officials in his administration. We also met with the Panama Canal Authority, as well as private sector stakeholders. We had very candid discussions on key issues such as Panama's plans to ameliorate the water level challenges, the bidding processes used to allocate transits during times of restrictions, and our concern the Canal Authority was bringing in far more revenue during the crisis than it had before limits were forced by the water shortages. Both the government of Panama and the Canal Authority did answer our questions very substantively. The Canal Authority informed us they were already making changes to that allocation system. Now, fortunately, Panama's 2024 rainy season has for now alleviated the most acute water supply issues at the canal, and normal transit volumes have been restored. That said, while the Panamanian government and Canal Authority have, with the advice of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, developed credible plans to mitigate future water shortages, they also warned that it is likely that at least one more period of reduced transits will occur before these plans can be fully implemented. Now, since our meetings, the FMC has continued to monitor Panama's progress on this front and examined other policy changes announced by the Canal Authority. I do have continuing concerns, particularly about the auction-light slot allocation procedures, not so much as they are applied right now because transits are not being rationed, but when another low rainfall period occurs. As we learn more about Panama and the Canal Authority, how they would handle another drought and receive more input from American importers and exporters, the Commission does remain positioned to take appropriate action if warranted. How the Panama Canal's operations affect American commerce was a high priority for the FMC under my chairmanship. It remains a high priority at the Federal Maritime Commission under Commissioner Sola's chairmanship, and I am extremely pleased that it is a priority for this committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next witness is law professor Eugene Kontorovich, who can explain Panama's treaty obligations and the remedies the U.S. might seek for potential violations. Professor Kontorovich is appearing virtually, and Professor, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, honorable members of the committee, I appreciate and regret the opportunity to testify before you remotely. I've been asked to discuss possible violations of the treaty concerning the permanent neutrality and operation of the Panama Canal entered into between the two countries in 1977. I should say at the outset that determining whether a certain situation violates the treaty is a mixed question of law and fact, depending on both the meaning in the treaty and the actual situation on the ground. I have not had any classified intelligence briefings on this subject, so I'm going to speak about the meaning of the treaty primarily. We shall see that under international law, each party to the treaty is entitled to determine for itself whether a violation has occurred. Now, in exchange for the United States ceding control of the canal, which it built and maintained, Panama agreed to a special regime of neutrality. The essential features of this regime of neutrality is that the canal must be open to all nations for transit, that's Article 2, equitable tolls and fees, Article 3, an exclusive Panamanian operation, Article 5, the prohibition of any foreign military presence, Article 5. Article 5 provides that only Panama shall operate the canal. Testifying about the meaning of the treaty at the Senate ratification hearings, the Carter administration emphasized that this prohibits foreign operation of the canal as well as the garrisoning of foreign troops. Now, Article 5 appears to be primarily concerned about control by foreign sovereigns. If Panama signed a treaty with the People's Republic of China, whereby the latter would operate the canal on Panama's behalf, this would be a clear violation. But what if Panama contracted for port operations with a Chinese state firm, or even a private firm influenced or controlled in part by the Chinese government? The Suez Canal Company was itself, before being nationalized, a private firm in which the United Kingdom was only a controlling shareholder. Yet this was understood to represent British control over the canal. In other words, a company need not be owned by the government to be in part controlled by the government. So the real question is the degree of de jure or de facto control over a foreign sovereign company, and scenarios range from government companies in an authoritarian regime, completely controlled, to purely private firms in an open society like the United States, but there's many possible situations in the middle. The treaty is silent on the question of how much control is too much, and as we'll see, this is one of the many questions committed to the judgment and discretion of each party. Now, turning to foreign security forces, the presence of third country troops would manifestly violate Article 5, but this does not mean that anything short of a People's Liberation Army base flying a red flag is permissible. The presence of foreign security forces could violate the regime of neutrality, even if they're not represented in organized and open military formations. Modern warfare has seen belligerent powers seek to evade international legal limitations by disguising their actions in civilian garb. From Russia's notorious little green men to Hamas terrorists hiding in hospitals or disguised as journalists, bad actors seek to exploit the fact that international treaties focus on sovereign actors. Many of China's man-made islands in the South China Sea began as civilian projects before being suddenly militarized. Indeed, this issue was discussed in the Senate ratification hearings over the treaty. Dean Rusk said informal forces would be prohibited under the treaty. Thus, the ostensible civilian character of the Chinese presence around the canal does not in itself mean that it could not represent a violation of the treaty if, for example, these companies and their employees involved Chinese covert agents or other agents of the Chinese security forces. So this leads us to the final question: who determines whether neutrality is being threatened, or compromised. Unlike many other treaties that provide for third-party dispute resolution, the Neutrality Treaty has no such provision. Instead, the treaty makes clear that each party determines for itself the existence of a violation. Article 4 provides that each party is separately authorized to maintain the regime of neutrality, making it a separate obligation of each party. The Senate's understanding accompanying to ratification also make clear that Article 5 allows each party to take, quote, unilateral action. Senator Jacob Javits, at the markup hearing, said that while the word unilateral is abrasive, we can, quote, decide that the regime of neutrality is being threatened and then act with whatever means are necessary to keep the canal neutral unilaterally. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor. Our final witness, World Shipping Council CEO Joseph Kramick, can discuss the challenges faced by container lines moving goods to or from America through the Panama Canal. Mr. Kramick, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the committee. My name is Joe Kramick. I'm President and CEO of the World Shipping Council. The World Shipping Council is the global voice of liner shipping. Our membership consists of 90% of the world's liner shipping tonnage, which are container vessels and vehicle carriers. They operate on fixed schedules to provide our customers with regular service to ship their goods in ports throughout the world. Our focus is on sustainable, safe, and secure international ocean transportation. Nothing could be more important to the U.S. economy and WSC member lines who carry the trade that supports the U.S. economy than a sustainable, safe, and secure Panama Canal. As you have heard, using the Panama Canal to transit between the Atlantic and Pacific saves significant time and money. A typical voyage from Asia to the U.S. or East Coast can be made in under 30 days using the canal, while the same journey can take up to 40 days if carriers must take alternate routes. From a commercial trade perspective, the big picture is this. One of the world's busiest trade lanes is the Trans-Pacific. The Trans-Pacific is cargo coming from and going to Asia via the United States. Focusing in a bit, cargo coming from Asia and bound for U.S. Gulf and East Coast ports always transits the Panama Canal. Similarly, cargo being exported from U.S. and East Coast ports, a large share of which are U.S. agricultural exports like soybeans, corn, cotton, livestock, and dairy, also almost always transits the Panama Canal. The result is that 75% of canal traffic originates in or is bound for the United States. Some examples include the Port of Houston exports $14 billion in containerized trade to Asia. The Port of New Orleans exported $27 billion in seaborne trade to Asia, not all of which was on container vessels. The Port of New York and New Jersey exported $16.5 billion to Asia, and the Port of Savannah exported $13 billion to Asia. Our member lines are the largest users of the Panama Canal, and we carry the bulk of this trade. Global ocean trade is always facing challenges, as you've heard, and the Panama Canal is no exception. We've talked about the drought in 2023 and the historic low water levels that it caused in Lake Gatun, which feeds the canal locks, a unique system that is a freshwater feed as a result, as contrasted to an ocean-to-ocean system, which the French tried and failed, but which is actually active in the Suez Canal. These low water levels reduce transits from 36 transits a day to as low as 22 per day. Additionally, the low water levels required a reduction in maximum allowable draft levels, or the depth of the ship below the waterline, which for our members reduced the amount of containers they could carry through the canal. This resulted in a 10% reduction in import volumes for U.S. Gulf and East Coast ports, with the Port of Houston experiencing a 26.7% reduction. Looking forward, the volume of containerized trade coming into the United States remains at near record levels and continues to expand. 2024 numbers are just out, and the inbound trade to the U.S. expanded 15%, which is second only to the 17.5% inbound traffic we experienced during the pandemic-driven demand. Just yesterday, the Port of Houston reported record-breaking trade volumes with an 8% increase More broadly, WSC member lines have transported $1 trillion in goods to and from U.S. ports, which represents 64% of all seaborne trade, contributed $2 trillion in economic output to the United States, supported 6.4 million U.S. jobs, and over $442 billion in wages and salaries. These goods are the clothes on your back, the shoes on your feet, and the phones likely in your hands or on your dais. WSC members look forward to working with the committee on maintaining the sustainability, safety, and security of the Panama Canal. It's a vital ocean artery critical to U.S. trade. The record volume of cargo that our members continue to carry, it demonstrates our commitment. We appreciate the committee's continuing support, commitment to the liner shipping industry, the U.S. maritime industry, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to questioning. I want to start, Chairman Solo, Commissioner Maffei. Are you aware of allegations from some vessel operators of disparate treatment, such as sweetheart deals or favorable rebates by Panama for canal transits?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We have become aware through some complaints by cruise lines that said that they were not getting a refund of their canal tolls. When we looked into this, we found a Panamanian Executive Order, Decree 73, that specifically says that if a cruise line would stop at a certain port, that they could be refunded 100% of the fees. And as far as I know, that's the only instance where that exists.
Yep, we continue to look into it, but the cruise ships is the one area where we have found something that would fit that bill, I think, Chairman.
Some press coverage says the Panama Canal is nominally independent, even though it provides a large share of the Panamanian government's revenue. Chairman Sola, briefly, can you describe how the FMC views the Canal Authority and the Panamanian government? Are they distinct entities or a single foreign government apparatus that controls the Panama Canal?
Mr. Chairman, our law is clear. It comes from the Merchant Marine Act of 1920 that there's only one entity. And in addition to that, our predecessor at the Federal Maritime Commission was the U.S. Shipping Board, was formed in 1916 in direct result of the Panama Canal. The very first chairman of that was George Washington Goethals, which was the very first administrator of the canal. So we look at it as one entity.
Yeah, I might just add, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
It's sort of like the Georgia Ports Authority and the state of Georgia. The Georgia Ports Authority is clearly independent. It can do its own bonds. It's got independent governance. But ultimately, Georgia is responsible for it, the state of Georgia.
Right. So Panama was the very first Latin American country to join China's Belt and Road Initiative. And right now, China is building a fourth bridge across the Panama Canal for car traffic and light rail. Chairman Solo, why should Chinese construction of a bridge near Panama City concern the United States?
Mr. Chairman, we all saw the tragedy that happened here in the Francis Scott Key Bridge incident and the devastation that had happened to Baltimore. We also saw recently what happened in the Suez Canal, where we had a ship get stuck in there. It's not only the construction of the bridge, but it's a removal of a bridge, as I understand it, called the Bridge of the Americas. It was built in 1961, and that would paralyze cargo traffic in and out of the canal.
Panama also recently renewed the concessions for 2 container ports to a Chinese company, Hutchison Ports PPC. Of course, Chinese companies are controlled by the Communist Party. How does China use control of those ports for economic gain?
Mr. Chairman, I am a regulator, a competition regulator, and the Chinese ports that you're referring to, let me put them into scope. The one on the Pacific, the Port of Balboa, is roughly the same size as the Port of Houston. They do about 4 million containers a year. They have about 28 gantry cranes. The one on the Atlantic is the same as my hometown of Miami. They do about 1 million containers. So where Roger Gunther in the Port of Houston generates about $1 billion a year, and Heidi Webb in Miami does about $200 million, the Panama Ports Company paid zero for 20 years on that concession. So it's really hard to compete against zero. So I think that's our concern, our economic concern that we would have.
Commissioner Maffei, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I I do too also think it is important. I would point out that you don't have to stop at either port. It's not like these two ports control the entrance to the canal. That is the Canal Authority that does control that. However, I think it's of concern. I would also point out that the Panamanian government thinks it's of concern too, because they're conducting their own audit of those particular deals. But we remain very interested as well.
So, Professor Kontorovich, I want to turn to the treaty. So, President Trump has made important arguments. Both the Chinese control over canal infrastructure and exorbitant fees charged for canal transits are violations of the Neutrality Treaty. I want to highlight three specific provisions that you mentioned in your opening statement. Article 4 of the Neutrality Treaty requires both the United States and Panama to establish and maintain, quote, a regime of neutrality. Article 5 limits any foreign control by providing, quote, only the Republic of Panama shall operate the canal and maintain military forces, defense sites, and military installations within its national territory. And finally, Article 3(1)(c) requires that, quote, tolls and other charges be just, reasonable, equitable, and consistent with the principles of international law. In your opinion, as an expert in international law, could the facts discussed here be considered violations of the Neutrality Treaty in force right now between the United States and Panama?
So I think, Senator, I think potentially they could, but it's impossible to say definitively without knowing more, in particular about the degree of Chinese control and involvement in these companies. I think it's important to note that these port operation companies that operate the ports on both sides, when they received their first contract, it was just a few months before Hong Kong was handed over to China. In other words, they received them as British companies, sort of very oddly, just a few months before the handover. Now, of course, since then, Hong Kong has been incorporated into China, has been placed under a special national security regime, and the independence of those companies has been greatly abridged. To say nothing of state-owned companies involved elsewhere in the canal area, which raise significantly greater questions. Additionally, I should point out that the understandings between President Carter and Panamanian leader Herrera, which were attached to the treaty and form part of the treaty, provide that the United States can, quote, defend the canal against any threat to the regime of neutrality. And I understand that as providing some degree of preemptive authority to intervene. One need not wait until the canal is actually closed by some act of sabotage or aggression, which, as we heard from the testimony, would be devastating to the United States. But there is some incipient ability to address potential violations.
And your final point there leads to my last question, which is, if the United States determines that Panama is in violation of the treaty, what is the range of remedies the United States would have for that treaty violation?
So I think it may be shocking to people to hear today, but when one goes over the ratification history and the debates and discussions in this body over this treaty, it was clear that the treaty was understood as giving both sides separately the right to resort to use armed force to enforce the provisions of the treaty. And it's not so surprising when one understands that the United States made an extraordinary concession to Panama by transferring this canal, which the United States built at great expense and maintained and operated, to Panama gratis. And in exchange, it received a kind of limitation, a permanent limitation on Panamanian sovereignty, that Panama agreed that the United States could enforce this regime of neutrality by force. Now, of course, armed force should never be the first recourse for any kind of international dispute and should not be arrived at sort of rashly or before negotiations and other kinds of good offices are exhausted. But it's quite clear that the treaty contemplates that as a remedy for violations.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kramek, I think costs are critical. When you think about it, we're here discussing costs. Why? Because consumers pay more when shipping costs are higher. Whether our farmers who are trying to export their products, as we saw during COVID, are literally our products getting left on the docks, and importers are paying more if shipping costs are too high. So when we look at these incidents that we now see in our supply chain, and we had our own incident in Seattle where a container ship lost power and was careening towards our big Ferris wheel in the downtown, right next to our ferry terminal. Luckily, some passenger ferry vessels were able to push the tug from, out of the direct path of severe devastation. So now we mentioned Suez Canal, we mentioned Baltimore, we have our own Seattle experience. What do we need to do to make sure on the cost side that we aren't, that we're making the right investments from a security level to make sure that these kinds of incidents that can do great harm do not happen? And Commissioner Sola, since you were at U.S. Southern Command, what do you think we need to do to renegotiate or to have a conversation with the Panamanians about the security level that we think needs to exist in Panama with this close proximity? And Mr. Maffei, this audit, will the audit lead to a discussion with Panama about those contracts? As I've said in my opening statement, I believe we should be very aggressive about U.S. involvement here and in Latin America. I think Panama represents one of the biggest U.S. supporters in that region, but we should engage to get this right, both on the cost side and on the security side. So if I could just hear your comments on each of those.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Well, certainly even one incident is unacceptable from a safety perspective that you're citing. Our members work tremendously hard with the International Maritime Organization, the U.S. Coast Guard, and other entities to try to have the safest operations possible. But accidents do occur. They are rare if you count the number of some 7,000 port visits a year. But again, one is unacceptable. So continued investment, obviously, in U.S. infrastructure and a review. I mean, we have a lot of old infrastructure, as the tragic incident in Baltimore illustrated, unfortunately. We have these bridges that need a hard look to whether or not they need additional fendering systems and the like. And investments in our ports and infrastructure can be helpful along those lines as well. And for our members, I can assure you that they continue to invest in the latest technology. We have over 600 new ships on order with some of the latest technology in the world. So we're playing our role.
And I want the U.S. to get a big portion of that. That's why we need to reinvigorate. Commissioner Sola, what about just a new U.S. Southern Command, U.S. government conversation with the canal authorities and the government about the security level that we seek?
Thank you very much, Senator. First of all, the airborne wing that I'm wearing today is decorative. I have not worn a uniform in 35 years, so this is my personal experience here. I believe that the security of the canal has always been understood to be provided by the United States. Panama does not have a military. And I always believe that there's been a close relationship with Southern Command that we would provide that. And it would be nice to see if we had a formalization of that in one way or another, because I don't believe that it's in the treaty at all.
Okay, so formalization of maybe a cyber security agreement. See, I'm thinking you have accidents and then you have larger cybersecurity issues that you just have to be on top of. And what I don't like about anybody that has a back door is I'm for the United States advocating, don't buy from people who have a government back door. Don't do it, because what are you going to do? At some point in time, you're going to regret that. Commissioner Maffei, what about this audit, and could we push Panama on these issues of looking at closer U.S. infrastructure instead, particularly since, the sea change here is like what everybody said. Like, everybody thought this was Hong Kong, then it turned into China. We didn't have an ambassador after that. Next thing you know, they've made more aggressive postures. They're making aggressive postures everywhere. That's why the United States saying no government backdoors in technology and getting 5 other technology nations and democracies to say the same thing and evangelize that every day is going to help us.
Yeah.
And so is the investment. But what about getting the stevedoring business or some of that back into proximity under the audit?
Well, it is the Panama Comptroller's Office, and they are investigating, contracts at Panamanian ports. And we don't have any jurisdiction over Panamanian ports per se. But your broader point, I think, is very, very important. While we were down there, both of us heard, I think, several times that the Panamanians would, the ones we talked to anyway, would welcome U.S. companies coming in and doing a lot of this work. Frankly, their bids are not competitive with the Chinese bids. Frankly, they're not that existent because U.S. companies can make more money doing things other places. But even if they were existent, it is difficult to put competitive bids when the Chinese bids are so heavily subsidized by China. So you're absolutely right. This is a problem, and it's a problem in many, many other areas of the world that we can get into if you want in subsequent questions. But that's the concern.
My time has expired, but I think my major point is let's be a big maritime powerhouse. Let's revitalize our supply chains, drive down costs for consumers, and secure what we need to secure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. And very quickly, Commissioner Maffei, you talked about the Chinese bids were heavily subsidized by the Chinese government. What would China's incentive be to heavily subsidize those bids to undercut American companies and other companies?
Yeah, it's not a real short answer, but Senator, China's made no secret of its ambitious policies to gain influence at ports throughout the globe. It's invested in 129 ports in dozens of countries. It runs a majority of 17 ports. That does not include this Hong Kong company, right? So that's just direct Chinese-owned ports. So it has been a part of their Belt and Road strategy, whatever you want to call it, the Maritime Silk Road for decades. So they believe that this influence, this investment in owning maritime ports is important to their economy.
Senator Fisher.
It's important to ours too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the ports and where we are on that. In 2021, Hutchinson was awarded those two ports, Port Balboa and Port Cristobal, in a no-bid award process. Can you tell me, does the United States have any authority or recourse with the Panama Canal Authority under our current agreement with Panama to rebid those terminal concession contracts? And perhaps, Mr. Kontorovich, that's more in your purview.
Senator.
Yeah,
Senator
Please.
Fisher, both of those ports were redone for 25 years until 2047, if I believe, and they have to pay $7 million is what the ongoing rate is for the Port of Houston and the Port of Miami size concessions.
And it can't be rebid until after that date?
Well, I believe that's what the Comptroller's Office is auditing, both of those ports and that contract. And that was done under the previous Panamanian administration. A new administration came in and they called for an audit of that contract immediately.
Mr. McVeigh, but you were talking about how to incentivize companies from the United States to be able to participate in a bid process that doesn't seem to be reasonable. And how do you think that the Panamanians would welcome viable alternatives? Are we in that position yet?
Senator, let me first say that this is outside the scope of what the Federal Maritime Commission does, but having gone there, having looked at this issue very carefully, I think it is very important. It was mentioned, actually, Senator Cantwell just mentioned Ex-Im Bank program, so it's not like this doesn't happen, but it certainly has not been a huge priority of the United States to try to, if you will, match these bids, to create programs widely available to U.S. firms in order to put together more competitive bids in these countries where some of their domestic laws, I'm not sure about Panama, but some of their domestic laws actually require that you go to the lowest bidder sometimes, just as ours do. So, yeah, I think if you're looking for places to do U.S. policy to counter this, I think you definitely want to look at whether the United States should be, for strategic and economic reasons, investing in infrastructure in important maritime locations all over the world, China certainly has done that, and they've been doing it for 20 years, and it is a cow that has long left the barn.
You mentioned investing in infrastructure. I was at the Panama Canal in 2023, and I learned at that time about the loss of fresh water with each ship movement through the canal. You talked about the drought, sir, in your opening comments. Fresh water is vital to the workings with the canal. How effective do you think investments in increasing that freshwater storage are? Are they happening? Are they viable? You touched on it briefly in your opening comments, but how do we see those investments happening so that we can have operational stability?
Yeah, it's a good question, a bit out of my purview, but I will say that there's several investments. There is water reclamation, pumping water up, et cetera. But the main thing, the main plan that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has helped the Panamanian Authority develop involves another basic expansion of bringing in even more water at an elevation that you could then use to continue the canal. Now, there's a lot of issues with implementing that, not the least of which being indigenous people in those areas. Not a huge number, but certainly towns and things, and negotiating that and all sorts of other issues, just as if it was in the United States, there would be issues. But it is viable. You can, in that part of the world, you can make more fresh water available to make the canal not have to be limited. However, it takes time, and there will at least be one more incidence of severe limitations before that occurs, unless we get really, really lucky. And there could be more than that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz and Ranking Member Cantwell. At the heart of this hearing is a fundamental question about how the U.S. will compete on the world stage and maintain our national security. These are the questions that will define the future of this country. For American families to see lower prices and better economic opportunities, we have to meet this moment honestly and seriously. And I'm proud to have joined Senators Cantwell and Blackburn to reintroduce the bipartisan Promoting Resilient Supply Chains Act, legislation that I led and authored in the House. This bill ensures that we have a national strategy to address our broken supply chains, whether it is a bridge collapse, a major global conflict, or unions striking for their rights. Interruptions and disruptions to our supply chains severely impact our economy. Our bipartisan legislation tackles this issue by elevating supply chains like the disruptions at the Panama Canal to be proactive and strategic. It helps us understand how we strengthen our ties with our friends and allies instead of pushing them into the arms of our competitors. I agree with Ranking Member Cantwell that we should have a hearing on how we compete with countries like China. And I have grave concerns about China's global infrastructure investments and any cyber threats to the U.S. Addressing these are our national security interests. With that, I'd like to shift to my first line of questioning, and it is for you, Captain Kramek. It's no secret that the canal has had issues due to droughts, nor is increasingly frequent drought a new phenomenon. Do you believe the Panama Canal Authority did enough to anticipate the issues impacting the canal's operation?
Senator Blunt Rochester, thanks for your question. They did the best, I guess, with the information that they had. I don't know that they anticipated a drought of that magnitude. I would say going forward, what Commissioner Maffei just discussed about the development of a second reservoir to feed into Lake Gatun, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doing a feasibility review of that project, as well as some other projects that were mentioned, that seems to be a good path forward in terms of resiliency of the Panama Canal and making it a viable waterway for 2050 and beyond.
I think part of the challenge is that it was recently started and time is of the essence. Did you think that the Canal Authority considered the obvious impacts from drought in its planning?
Senator Blunt Rochester, I don't have that information on what they considered.
It is clear that the Canal Authority knew that this would have an impact on shipping, and that enough hadn't been done to address it. Now that we're faced with this impact, what do you think the Canal Authority needs to do expeditiously to bring the canal back into full authority, full operation?
So they are back to full operation, is my understanding. Traffic is flowing well. But looking forward, I think it is taking a hard look at some of these infrastructure projects to make the canal more viable, like I mentioned.
The Port of Wilmington is in my state. We're very proud of it. It's one of the leading importers of fruits. The delays through the canal have an outsized impact on perishable goods like those that my port handles. Do you believe the Canal Authority can and should prioritize perishable goods or provide some other solution to support perishable goods? And anyone on the panel can answer that.
Yes, ma'am. Let me address your question because I'm not sure it's my place to exactly answer it, but you're quite right. So one of the complaints that we've heard is from container shippers, mostly exporters, that export goods, as you say, and many other commodities too, are sensitive either because of market conditions, such as cotton, or because of actual perishability of the product, such as what you mentioned. However, they're on container ships, and most of the cargo on the container ship is less time sensitive. In the bidding process that the Panamanian Canal Authority developed in order when they did have to ration these slots, it was a bidding process, and the highest bidder got the first slot, got the less of a delay. The challenge there is every kind of commodity and every kind of ship was bidding. So liquid natural gas, which is all the cargo on that ship is both extraordinarily valuable, not that your agricultural commodities aren't valuable, but compared pound for pound to the LNG, and very, very, it's you're losing volume every delay. So they would far outbid the container shippers. Now, whether or not there's something that can be done specifically to help these container, I'm not sure. We've been looking into that, but it does remain a large concern is how do we figure out a way for these agricultural shippers who are, not the main players on these ships, but an important part of it, particularly for the United States. So you bring up a great question. I wish I had a better answer, but
Thank you for your answer. I'll be submitting some questions for the record because I know my time has run out, and I really want to understand also what we can do as the United States in terms of us being able to bid and be competitive in these bids. What can we do better? So I'll be submitting questions for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this important hearing, and I appreciate the witnesses. I have questions for now primarily focused on Chairman Sola and Professor Konoradovich. So let's just, the setting in which you testified, 2 Chinese companies operate the 2 huge ports on both ends of the Panama Canal, and the concession for these ports were extended in 2021 for a 25-year period without any bidding. Is that correct? Okay, so it was clearly a sweetheart deal, correct?
According to the press releases, the company paid back taxes of $150 million.
And the Panama Deputy Attorney General has now objected to that. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
The comptroller of the country has asked for an audit of.
But someone objected to it when it was going on.
A lot of people objected to it.
So Chinese Communist Party officials are known to bribe other officials in countries all around the world. We know that. They do it all the time. No offense to Panama, but they don't have the greatest reputation of having officials who aren't on the take. So is there any evidence that the Chinese bribed people for this great concession? And if so, Professor, would that be a violation of the treaty? Let's assume we find evidence that Chinese Communist Party officials bribed Panama officials for this sweetheart deal. Would that be and I think it's probably likely because the Chinese do this everywhere. Would that be a violation of this treaty?
So in itself, that would not be a violation. What would be a violation is actual threats to the operation of the canal.
Okay.
However, to the extent that the Chinese government was involved in procuring these contracts, it provides sort of additional support for the notion that these companies are serving some kind of governmental interest. So it wouldn't be a violation itself, but it would be circumstantial evidence to support it.
Let me get to the issue of threats. Let's assume the PRC, the PLA, invaded Taiwan or invaded the Philippines or went to war somewhere in the South China Sea. And we were surging our Navy to the Indo-Pacific through the Panama Canal. Are the companies now on controlling both sides of the Panama Canal, the Chinese companies, subject to the PRC's national security laws that mandate cooperation with the military, with state intelligence agencies? Does anyone know that? Professor,
They're subject all the time. They're subject to those laws all the time by virtue of being Hong Kong companies. And they face, of course, consequences for not complying with the wishes of the Chinese government. And one of the arguments
wouldn't that be a violation of the treaty? And isn't that a huge risk to us right now that the Chinese?
So that is a threat to the neutrality.
If they invaded Taiwan, invaded the Philippines, they could go to these two companies saying, "Hey, shut it down, make it hard, sink a ship in the canal." And wouldn't they be obligated to do that under Chinese law if they were ordered to by the PLA or the CCP?
I don't know if they'd be obligated, but certainly the People's Republic of China would have many tools of leverage and pressure on these companies. That's why the treaty specifically says that we can act not just to end actual obstructions to the canal. We don't have to wait until the canal is closed by hostile military action. That would be a suicide pact. That would be catastrophic for us. But rather that we can respond at the inchoate, incipient level to threats. And then this is up to the president to determine whether this is significantly robust to constitute
So,
an imminent
Professor,
threat.
aren't we kind of walking up to the idea of a suicide pact because we got two big Chinese companies on both ends of the Panama Canal who, if there's a war in Indo-PACOM, Taiwan that involves us and China, these companies would be obligated to do the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party and PLA? I mean, aren't we kind of walking up to a very significant national security threat already?
Yeah, certainly there's a threat, and I think what makes the action of the Chinese government so difficult to respond to, but important to respond to, is that they conceal this in sort of levels of gray, right, without direct control.
Well, let me ask you on that topic, this is my last question, Professor. Let's assume that we find out, and again, it wouldn't be surprising, I think you can almost assume it, that these two companies have Chinese spies or military officials within the ranks of the employees of the companies. Let's assume we found that out. Somehow that becomes public. But I don't think it's a big assumption. It's probably true right now. So you have spies and military personnel within the ranks of these two companies that are controlling both ends of the Panama Canal. For you, Professor and Chairman Sola, wouldn't that be a blatant violation of Article 5 of the Neutrality Treaty, if that were true?
Yeah.
Which probably is true.
Yes.
I
do think that it would be. I do think it would be a clear violation. As Dean Rusk, former Secretary of State Dean Rusk, said at the ratification hearings, informal forces can violate Article 5 as well as formal forces.
And
So
Chairman
clearly,
Sola, do you
that
agree with that?
essentially would be a
And
violation.
is there any evidence of Chinese spies or other nefarious Chinese actors embedded in these companies?
Senator, we have no information of that.
Okay.
And that's not under the purview of the federal.
But you agree that would be a violation of Article 5 of the Neutrality Treaty?
I do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. Commissioner Maffei, good to see you. Thank you for being here today. I am very concerned about China's large and growing influence in the world's infrastructure network. A company from Hong Kong operates 2 ports in the Panama Canal, one on each end. And while the company is not Chinese state-owned, it is subject to China's national intelligence law, as we've been discussing. Moreover, a Chinese state-owned entity is currently building a bridge over the Panama Canal. But the Panama Canal is just one example of how far China's influence stretches. Their dominance in maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding sectors lessens competition, creates supply chain risks, and creates opportunities for surveillance and information gathering. In order to facilitate the movement of goods throughout the world, it's essential to have a secure and level playing field, which we currently don't. Chinese current practices do not allow for that. The United States Trade Representative recently investigated China's practices in the commercial shipbuilding sector under Section 301, and recently concluded that their dominance is a burden to United States commerce. A few decades back, we were the dominant country in commercial shipbuilding. In 2023, we built 5 commercial ships, and China built over 1,700, according to that investigation. So what policies would you recommend to prioritize growth of the United States' influence in the maritime and logistics sector to compete with China and level the playing field?
Answer in less than a minute. Yep. Senator Baldwin, it's very good to see you again, and we were colleagues for one term in the House, and I appreciate that. I think the best I can answer in a short term is to amen to everything you said. And as an illustration, Senator Sullivan was talking about Hutchison Ports. That's actually the same company that runs terminals on both ends of the canal. I am concerned about that. However, if we want to be concerned about that, all of us should lose a lot more sleep than we're losing. Because if there's spies there, then there might be spies at other Hutchison ports. And there are other Hutchison ports in almost every part of the world. They own the largest container port in the United Kingdom, Felixstowe, which is responsible for nearly half of Britain's container trade. They control major maritime terminals in Argentina, Australia, the Bahamas, Germany, Indonesia, Mexico, Myanmar, the Netherlands, South Korea, and Tanzania. If owning and managing adjacent ports means that China somehow has operational control or strategic control over the Panama Canal, they also have it over the Suez, the Singapore Straits, the Mediterranean Sea, and the English Channel. That's just one aspect of what you were talking about. That doesn't include the shipbuilding, heavily subsidized, such that now I believe over half of new ships that are in the companies that belong to the World Shipping Council are coming from China, not because these are bad companies, but because they're undercutting other things. It's a problem that has been going on for 20 years, which makes it very difficult to answer your question. It is a long answer. This is not a problem that occurred last week. This is not something that President Trump identified. This was going on all of President Biden's term, but all of President Trump's first term. It has been going on for decades and decades through both U.S. Republicans and Democrats as president. The only thing I can say is I echo what Ranking Member Cantwell said, and I think others of both parties have echoed it, that we need some sort of overall maritime strategy. We have to acknowledge that this is part of our national security, that economic resilience is extraordinarily important, and I believe this is the greatest country in the world. I think if we start countering some of these efforts, we can do it, but it has to become a national priority. And part of the challenge is we're talking about outside the borders of our U.S. Investing outside the borders of our U.S. does not make a very good campaign ad, but it may be necessary to secure, particularly with such an aggressive and, frankly, on this, open strategy that China has had.
Thank you for that answer. I know my time is now short. I will allow Professor Kantorovich to answer this for the record. But, Professor, I'd like to ask for your help in finding productive actions we can take to overcome some of the challenges that are being discussed today. I'm confident that we can find bipartisan solutions to pursue. It is my view that we should strengthen our relationship with Panama through mutually beneficial actions. For one, we should have a fully staffed embassy. The United States went without an ambassador to Panama from 2018 to 2022, largely due to partisan gridlock in the Senate confirmation process. So what additional strategies would you suggest the U.S. pursue to encourage Panama to enhance its security relationship with us, the United States of America, rather than China? And how can we leverage the strength of the American private sector to encourage more investment in the important infrastructure projects where China currently has a strong presence, in fact, dominance?
Thank you. So my understanding of the Chinese advantage is that to the extent that they're willing to use their government wealth to consistently underbid contracts, they have an advantage that can't be beat. And thus leaving these kind of issues to contracting is going to put American companies perpetually at a disadvantage. I think one potential action would be to make clear to Panama that based on these changes that have occurred over the years, increasing Chinese control over Hong Kong, the passage of the National Security Law, the Belt and Road Initiative, the military-civilian integration doctrine of China, that contracts with Chinese-based companies are considered suspect and incompatible with the neutrality regime of the treaty. That would at least give American companies and other truly private companies a fighting chance.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes or no, quickly for the three of you, just for the record, is the China investment into the Panama Canal a direct threat to U.S. national security? Yes or no? Mr. Solis, start with you down the panel. Thank you.
I don't have that information as an industry trade association senator.
Okay. All right. And we've talked some about the neutrality treaty, which I think is of concern to all of us. And as I have looked at this, and I appreciated Senator Sullivan's questioning on this, we look at how President Trump is going to push forward with getting this issue addressed. And we have heard a good bit about this from our shippers that are looking at what happens coming out of the port of Memphis. And I think that the government of Colombia learned a lesson last week that we are not going to go soft on some of these issues. And when you look at the fact that the U.S. is a primary user, it is the primary user of the Panama Canal. And we are also Panama's largest provider of direct foreign investment. I think those two things should be significant. Our foreign investment into Panama is $3.8 billion annually. This is why people are looking at this issue. So, Professor, let me come to you on this, and we thank you for joining us remotely. Shouldn't our investment in Panama be contingent on their adherence to that neutrality committee, ensuring that Panama and Panama alone would control that canal?
So certainly that is an action we can take to enforce the treaty and to enforce our understanding of the treaty. That's an action we can take even without the treaty. Right. So to the extent that the United States considers the Chinese operation of facilities around the canal to be against its interests, it can certainly condition aid and economic relationships on the exclusion of China. Now, the United States has typically not worked that way, and that may be one of the reasons why, as we heard in the testimony, China has basically made inroads everywhere. But for that, we don't even need the treaty. Certainly, if we consider the treaty to be violated, measures like that, far short of the armed force authorized by the treaty, would be reasonable and productive places to start.
Professor, let me interrupt you there because I do want to move on. I think that as you look at how China has used the Belt and Road Initiative, and we've talked some about that this morning, we know that they have pushed the digital yuan. And I am concerned that given their control over much of that infrastructure around the canal, that they would attempt to force U.S. shippers or our allies to bypass the dollar and use the digital yuan as they are in other countries where they're practicing debt diplomacy and where they're expanding the Belt and Road Initiative. So Chairman Sola, could you speak for a moment about the potential for fee manipulation with the CCP? Because as I mentioned, we are hearing a good bit about that. We are hearing that the toll structure disadvantages U.S. companies, that the Canal Authority has begun charging millions of dollars to skip the queue. And these fees put many bulk shippers in an adverse position, and these bulk shippers have a huge impact on ports along the lower Mississippi River. And, you know, these exorbitant fees are there unless you're going to face delays at the canal. And then the impact of hearing these Chinese companies would preference the yuan as opposed to the dollar.
Thank you, Senator. The fees that I think we are looking at, or we have been looked at, and the reason that we went there was because of the auctioning of the slots. And so what Panama did is they had a smaller percentage, maybe 20% allocation, and then they moved it up to 30% and 40% because it became a moneymaker for them. So as they reduced...
Okay, and let me interject here. The auctioning of the slots gives these the right to skip the queue.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so just for the record there, continue.
So the auctioning of the slot, under maritime law, it's first come, first served, but Panama's always put a certain percentage aside. And they started to put more and more. So we got a lot of complaints. We got a lot of complaints from LNG carriers that paid $4 million to go through. And we got a lot of complaints from agriculture that didn't have the money to pay to go through because their goods were gonna go down. So if you look at the financial statements, I'm a nerd, I look at financial statements of everybody. But the canal increased the amount of revenue that they had from about $500 million to $1.8 billion in the last 3 years, just because of those fees. So this is what is very concerned to us and for the American shippers.
And have you seen a tendency to preference the digital yuan over the dollar?
I've heard of the digital yuan, and I've also heard of it used in international shipping as a currency. It is something that I would say that we have an eye on because we have a digital shipping exchange rule coming up, but we will keep monitoring it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I can't help but think as we debate this issue of the Panama Canal, while it is important, if you want to look at what's happening right now, as in the middle of the night last night when an executive order was issued by, well, not an executive order, just a memo by the acting budget director, which put a pause on all federal funding for not only NIH research of cancer trials and not only Head Start, and people are in a panic and calling our offices. It's also a severe problem for trade and America's innovation. Freezing all federal funding already granted to improve port and freight infrastructure through the Port Infrastructure Program seems to me a major problem we should be addressing if we're talking about America's shipping interests. But I will go to the topic at hand. The Panama Canal is a critical trade corridor that allows for American farmers, other businesses to reach international customers. I care a lot about this shipping issue. As many of you know, Senator Thune and I joined forces 2 years ago to pass a very important bill that took on the international shippers in terms of giving more power to the Maritime Commission in taking on the rates they were charging businesses and farmers and manufacturers in America. And it actually immediately had an impact because they knew what was coming their way and continues to. I'll get to that in a minute. But I do want to raise with you, Commissioner Maffei, do you know of any instances where the United States has been singled out or treated unfairly under the neutrality treaty in the operation of the canal?
I do not. I would add that one of the reasons why saying the U.S. is disproportionately affected by raises in canal fees and other kinds of fees at the canal is because the United States disproportionately utilizes the canal.
Right, and that's something that would affect the total number of fees, and we know it is a critical trade corridor, and want to continue to use that corridor and be treated in a fair way. But I do think one of the things that hasn't been brought out as we look at the periods of congestion or reduced capacity at the canal, which we know have occurred, like we saw with last year's drought, can delay shipments, increase transportation costs, potentially leading to higher consumer prices. Commissioner, what steps can be taken to minimize disruptions and prevent cascading costs for consumers during periods of operational strain?
At the Panama Canal?
Yes.
I mean, the main thing is that, companies, importers and exporters need to make sure that they have very resilient supply chains. Depending on any one sea lane is awfully risky in this very, very difficult to predict world. It's one of the reasons why the Panama Canal is so important. In fact, it may be a bigger reason than a particular transit or line transit is the fact that it is there in case something goes wrong on the other end of the world, say, for instance, the Suez Canal, right? And it's that lack of redundancy right now that has been a big problem. And frankly, one of the reasons why shipping costs have gone up, because if you have to go all the way around Africa or go all the way around the Americas, you are taking fewer ships. So
Thank you, Mr. Kromick. In your testimony, you described how drought reduced imports at U.S. ports. Do these reductions affect prices for American consumers, or could they?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I love that short answer. Ocean Reform Act, I mentioned. Back to you, Commissioner. Has that law improved the ability of shippers to have unreasonable charges waived or refunded by ocean carriers? As we know, this has been a major problem for our carriers, which can translate into prices. And talk about how it has empowered shippers to file complaints against unreasonable practices by the carriers. By the shippers, of course, you know what I mean. I don't mean the carriers themselves. I mean the people that are trying to do business and sell their stuff. So
American exporters, American importers.
American exporters.
Absolutely. Look, I don't have a lot of time, but yes, it has had a tremendous effect. We have seen instances of waiving or forgiving detention demurrage fees or even refunding go way up. We've seen settlements go up with the major carriers. We've seen a lot more cases filed, so many, in fact, that we've had used to have one administrative law judge, now we have 3, and they still have too many cases. So a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. And are you concerned, I'll just end where I started, are you concerned about freezing funding that has already been granted for port and infrastructure improvement right now, given what we're trying to do with American ports so we can make stuff here and ship it instead of having it all come to us?
I mean, that's a complicated question. I'll just say at the Federal Maritime Commission, we try to do an awful lot with less. As the New York Times reporter has pointed out, we are funded at approximately our entire annual budget, about 1 hour of the container ship industry's profits during the COVID pandemic. Because of that legislation and subsequent appropriations, that's more like 68 minutes now. It's still a fraction of it. I don't know where, and I don't believe the chairman knows.
Well, of course, we only found this out 12 hours ago at midnight from an unknown bureaucrat. So our hope is that we will be able to give you those numbers to show what will happen to infrastructure if we simply freeze funding for all of these things across America. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank the panel for being here. It's good to see you all. Mr. Sola, the November 2024 report from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, it details China's efforts to deepen ties with countries across Latin America and the Caribbean. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter that report into the record. Mr. Chairman, if that's okay? Without objection. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. I think it's important to view the Chinese Communist Party's CCP activities in the Panama Canal Zone in the context of CCP's broader efforts to further access Latin America's markets and obstruct American interest in our own backyard. Mr. Sola, would you agree with that? That you see the CCP activity and hopefully to interrupt America's interest in the region?
Definitely an economic interest, Senator.
I was able to travel there a few years ago to see this firsthand and see the CCP's encroachment. So in your experience, are there noticeable differences in port operations when they're controlled by Chinese companies and financed or backed by Chinese loans? And if so, would you explain that?
We have a wonderful example because we have a U.S. Port there, SSA, out of Washington State, that I actually worked on the development of that many years ago and helped develop that. That used to be a former United States Navy submarine base, and we converted that. As far as the two ports that we have, they're completely different. We have one as a major infrastructure footprint and also a container port that's moving 4 million containers a year. That is almost, I mean, that's really a phenomenal amount. That's more than Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and you probably got to get Tampa and a little bit of Jacksonville in there to get that type of volume. And on the other side, we have a very small port, but it's a very strategic port on the Atlantic. So how are the operations done? Yeah, I don't know how they don't make money. I mean, if you want to come you know, right down to it, is if they've been operating the port for 20 years and they say that they haven't made any money, so they haven't been able to pay the government. That's what concerns me, is I don't believe that we're on a level playing field with the American ports.
Appreciate that. Mr. Kramick, what would be the consequences for U.S. trade and for the U.S. economy if access to the canal was suddenly revoked or significantly decreased for U.S. shippers?
It would be pretty catastrophic, Senator. And we have a good example. I mean, we've experienced that with the denial of the Red Sea right now, being able to use that. And as Chairman Maffei said, having to go around the continent of Africa, 40% longer voyages, significant more costs and crew, maintenance, fuel, and even emissions.
Do you have a ballpark of the difference if they're able to transit the canal versus go around South America?
I don't have a figure. I can tell you it in days, and it depends.
13 days.
So it's about 30 days if you can go through the canal, about 40 days right now because we can't use the Suez Canal if you want to go and go from, say, Asia cargo going to U.S. East Coast.
Thank you. Mr. Sola, another question. China's pouring billions of dollars into infrastructure projects all over Central and South America. And one example is in Ecuador. China made a deal with them to fund a $3.4 billion hydroelectric dam. There's 17,000 cracks already, and there's a lot of corruption. Ecuadorian officials, they've been imprisoned, sentenced on bribery charges. Using that as an example for the region, you know, the strategy of China is clear to just take, and this is in the words of an Ecuadorian minister, the strategy of China is clear that they want to take economic control of countries. In Panama, for instance, it's about 7.7% of their GDP, as I understand it. So using Ecuador as an example, should Congress be concerned that China could extract significant leverage over Panama, given the outsized role and revenue from the canal that it plays in their finances? If you turn your microphone.
Yes, Senator, it very well could, and I believe that we are in a very fortunate position now with Secretary Rubio, who knows the area very well and also knows China.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, can I just say you should also look at the port of Chansay in Peru. It'll fit that pattern.
Thank you very much.
Of Chinese investment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to all of you for coming on out here. I'll be honest with you, when I talk to some of my constituents in New Jersey about this, they mostly understand this issue right now because of the words of President Trump. So if you don't mind, I just kind of wanted to start there and work backwards. So Chairman Sola, you know, President Trump said, quote, China is operating the Panama Canal. We didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back. I guess I just wanted your assessment there. Is China operating the Panama Canal?
Chairman, Senator Kim, I never discredit anything that President Trump says.
Well, I guess
he has a different briefing book than I do. Mm-hmm. What I can say is that the Panama Canal is operated, as far as I know, by the ACP, the Panama Canal Authority, mm-hmm. and they're very efficient. at operating the canal on the throughput that they're able to do.
So you're saying from your knowledge, you don't know of reasoning to believe that China is operating the Panama Canal, from the knowledge that you have?
From the knowledge that I have on whether the, Senator, what we have here is the Panama Canal Authority is the authority where people will pay into the Panama Canal. I think that what, if you will allow me to, if a company is able to operate both ports.
Oh, I see what so you're talking about Hutchinson ports, right?
Yes.
So we're talking about what, Balboa and Cristobal ports, right?
Right, and they're subsidized.
So
they're subsidized.
They're subsidized. I guess my question to you is, does Hutchinson Port actually control the locks of the canal?
No.
Does it control directly the entrance to the canal?
Both ports are in operational control of the canal. In order for those ports to operate, the canal has to give them a special permit. And the reason is because when they're bringing a ship in or bringing a ship out, they block the traffic of the canal every single time.
I see.
So they have to have pilots, two pilots that go in there.
Is Balboa or Cristobal ports under the jurisdiction of the Panama Canal Authority?
They've been given by the Panama government the concessions. However, they're in the operational range of the Panama Canal.
Does that make those two ports under the jurisdiction of the treaty?
Let me say this, because I was in Panama when the Panama Canal was turned over. We didn't just give back the Panama Canal. We also gave back all the land and all the water on the entryway to it, and including what we had was a lot of military bases along there. So as soon as you come out of the Panama Canal, and I invite you to come there, I'd be happy
I'd love to come. Yeah, well, let's
so as soon
make
as
that
you come
happen.
out of the locks, you run into Corozal, which was a former military base. Corozal is run not by the Panama Canal Authority, it's run by the Panama government. After you pass that, you run into the port of Balboa. So what I'm trying to say is that when we talk about the Panama Canal Authority, they operate only where the ships go up and go down and come out. After that, you have where the pilots, will take you on the boat and take you off. So is it operational control of the Panama Canal? Yes, because the pilots are the ones that have to bring you in there and bring you out. And again, every time a ship goes into one of those ports, they block the traffic of the Panama Canal.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess I wanted to just ask you kind of directly then, what is your assessment of the Panama Canal's authority, in terms of their ability to administer the canal?
I think the Panama Canal Authority and their independences, if you read my opening statement and my written statement, they've done a fantastic job. And Panama has been running the canal for 25 years. They've given $28 billion to the coffers of the government in those 25 years. In the 25 years that the two ports that we call two ports, they've contributed zero. So I don't understand why Panama would allow those two ports to operate and put into jeopardy what they have, the operations that they do have in the canal.
I want to just end here on this, because I thought you had a really poignant point in your written testimony where you said, we must protect the independence of the Panama Canal Authority. Any efforts by other interests in Panama to diminish the independence or professionalism of the authority must be stopped. And I would just venture to say, as we talk about this as a committee, as a government, that we should try to follow those same words as well. We try to have nuance and precision with the words that we use. Otherwise, it very much looks like some of what we talk about is going to be perceived as undermining the Panama Canal Authority. And you said that you warned that that would be something that would actually boost up China's capacity in the region. So I just ask, as we deal with this going forward, that we be precise about it and try to make sure we're talking about exactly what we're addressing.
And specifically what I was talking about is the board of directors of the Panama Canal. I mean, are some of the board of directors on the board of directors of the ports that we have in question? So when you look at the annual report of those two ports, they have a hidden, or not a hidden, it basically says that they have local partners that are not identified. So I believe that if we had those identified, we would know more.
Yeah, and more precision there. Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want the committee to just imagine that Taiwan is under siege. The CCP, determined to crush Taiwan's resistance and prevent a U.S. response, activates a multi-pronged strategy, leveraging its control over global ports and shipping infrastructure. At the Panama Canal, one of America's most vital trade arteries, handling 40% of U.S. container traffic, Chinese-controlled ports at both ends suddenly close. Ships carrying food, oil, and military supplies are turned away because of technical difficulties, paralyzing the global economy. Gasoline prices soar, supermarket shelves empty, and supply chains collapse within days. China's state-owned ZPMC, which supplies 80% of U.S. port cranes, has equipped their cranes with cellular modems that create exploitable vulnerabilities. These cranes at U.S. ports mysteriously malfunction, halting critical operations. Factories close, millions lose their jobs, and the economy grinds to a halt. While this scenario may seem hypothetical, it is entirely plausible. Therefore, the canal must remain neutral, and the U.S. must ensure the CCP does not encroach on our vital economic and national security interests. In 2017, Senators Markey, Schatz, and Rubio urged President Trump to address China's aggressive maritime actions. Their warnings apply today as China's growing control over critical infrastructure, ports, and strategic waterways like the Panama Canal pose an unacceptable threat. America is sleepwalking into a carefully laid Chinese trap. And fortunately, people like President Trump aren't falling for it. I'm glad he's raised this issue. This dangerous complacency must end. That's why last week I introduced a Senate resolution to safeguard the Panama Canal from Chinese influence. It calls on Panama to expel Chinese entities in foreign control and honor its neutrality under the 1977 transfer agreement. The cost of inaction is too great. And I'll offer this up for anyone, but I think the biggest concern here is this Belt and Road Initiative. We've talked about it creating a debt trap, which is true. And building a bridge in Bangladesh is very different than this. I mean, there are reports of, the CCP building airports, and then when people are critical of the CCP, all of a sudden flights are canceled. Controlling a grid, they can turn it off and they can turn it off. And there's just no way on God's green earth that China can control the Panama Canal. And so however you want to define it, and I hope my Democrat colleagues, this is an issue that affects America that should not be partisan, and I hope they're not blinded by the fact that President Trump has come out so boldly on this. But we shouldn't tolerate this. The witnesses have stated they have operational control. We can get into the semantics of the Port Authority versus the control, but operational control of the Panama Canal is real by the CCP. The witnesses have also stated that a Chinese company got a sweetheart deal, a no-bid contract for control, operational control ultimately of these ports. So I guess I want to ask, because I've talked too long, I don't have much time for questions, but Professor Kantorovich, I do want to ask you, yes, as it relates to the treaty, and I'm glad Senator Cruz, or Chairman Cruz, has called this up, because there are real concerns about treaty violations here. What are the most blatant? What are the most obvious? Is it the unfair, is it the fact that we're being charged more? Is it the fact that these are Chinese-owned companies that are controlled by the CCP? What are the top 2 or 3 reasons that you would argue that they are, in fact, in violation of the treaty?
So again, I think the charges and fees are less of an issue because they don't discriminate across countries. We pay more because we use more, but it's not nationally discriminatory. The presence of Chinese companies, especially Chinese state companies, but not limited to them, do raise serious issues and concerns for the neutrality of the treaty. And I should point out, in relation to some of the earlier questioning, the canal, for purposes of the neutrality treaty, is not limited just to the actual locks of the canal and the transit of the of ships to the canal. According to Annex 1, Paragraph 1 of the treaty, it includes also the entrances of the canal and the territorial sea of Panama adjacent to it. So all of the air activities we're talking about are within the neutrality regime, the geographic scope of the neutrality regime in the treaty.
So the most, this is, I'm out of time, but the most dead-on hit here is the treaty specifically prevents foreign operations, and that's exactly what we have.
Yeah, so to the extent these companies are in fact de facto controlled by China, this is something that could threaten the neutrality regime of the treaty.
Okay.
Senator, may I make a point of clarification?
Sure.
You said that we all said that China had operational control. I don't believe that China currently has operational control over the Panama Canal. I'm not sure if any.
No, I didn't say all of you did. I said one of the witnesses.
All right. I will, but let me say this. I did agree that there was a threat posed by this ownership. I do think, though, that if your assumptions are correct, you are way understating the problem. That's right, understating the problem, because they also then control the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean Sea. And I actually have to admit, I'm a little confused as to why some of the senators asking these questions, Senator Blackburn, aren't more concerned about the biggest port in the United Kingdom being run by the Chinese. Petraeus in the port nearest Athens, one of the biggest ports in the Mediterranean, is not just run by a Chinese-linked company. It's run directly by a Chinese-owned company. And I was there. So you're on to something, but if you're just focusing on Panama, that's only part of it.
No, I agree with you. I think the difference here is that we gave it away. Huge mistake. Both Missouri senators voted for it back then. Huge mistake. But the one thing we got out of it, was a guarantee of neutrality. And that's the issue here. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great hearing. Appreciate this opportunity today. I'd like to touch on something I haven't heard discussed today, and that is, unfortunately, China is not the only hostile country that exploits Panama to endanger our national security. Iranian vessels under the Panamanian flag registry have been a problem for many years. Chairman Sola, can you explain how Panama has enabled Iran to evade our sanctions?
Yes, thank you, Senator. About a year ago, when we were having this drought issue, there was also a lot of focus on Iran and how they were funding Hamas and the Houthis because they were attacking the Red Sea. What we found was, what the United States has found, is that Iranian vessels are sometimes flagged by Panama in order to avoid sanctions, so that they could sell the fuel that they have, and then they can take that money and then they can use it as they wish. Panama at the time had a very complicated process to deflag the vessels. There was an investigation, there was an appeals process. By the time that we would, OFAC or the Treasury would go ahead and identify one of those vessels, by the time that they were doing the appeals and stuff like this, they've already changed flags to somewhere else. So when we went to Panama, we met with the Panamanian president. And I must say that we were very impressed because he was 30 minutes late, but he was breaking relations with Venezuela at the time because the election was the day before. We explained to him the situation. The very next day, we met with the maritime minister, with U.S. Embassy personnel, and Panama actually adjusted their appeals process so to make it more expedient. So if the United States or OFAC would come and say that this Iranian vessel is avoiding sanctions, now we have a process in place to go ahead and do that. And 53 vessels were deflagged because of that meeting.
If you would keep working on that, because that's a big deal, and thank you for that answer. Let me also go to, we've hammered on this a little bit, and I've heard several times some of you acknowledge that the interest from China is an economic threat to us, but let me come back to this defense. I think we've asked a number of times in different ways, but let me go back to the analogy of China puts a blockade on Taiwan, and we're trying to move ships into that area quickly. Can any of you say this is not just an economic threat to the United States, but a defensive threat as well?
at the FMC, it's not our area of expertise. We would leave that to the military experts. I will just say that to me, an economic threat is a military threat. I mean, indirectly, but it is.
Yeah, I just,
But
I've
in,
noted the
in
panel's
terms of what
quick
you're directly
reference
asking,
to economic.
we at the Federal Maritime Commission don't have that area.
Chairman?
I would say that my biggest concern is that when a Chinese contractor gets a contract in Latin America, they usually put a clause in there that they bring their own workers in from China. And these workers are housed in camps outside. And these camps will have guards on them, and they will have, sometimes they in Panama, for example, they have barbed wire around the camps. So we really don't know who's in the camps. And I think that, to me, causes me more concern on who's in the camp and what are they doing. So these are actually sometimes thousands of workers that are brought in, for example, for the bridge or to do a port or something like this to undercut the local labor.
Along those lines, let me just talk about dollars from China spent. We far outspend China in the region, yet if you look back on when Panama switched diplomatic recognition from Taiwan, and we had comments from the president, Taiwan is an inalienable part of Chinese territory. It coincided with economic investment from China in the region. Is that something overall, in addition to the canal, we need to watch?
Yes, we definitely need to watch economics. So we need to, we haven't, the United States has left a void there. We really have not been competitive in Panama, and hopefully that we can be.
Okay, and I've got just a few seconds. So this bridge, we've brought this up a couple of times, the possibility of this bridge being damaged and closing canal. But it reminds me of going through TSA at a suitcase, going through the TSA. Is there any reason that China can't watch or do whatever they want from this bridge to see what, get the intel from these containers? And does that concern anybody?
Well, it definitely concerns Southern Command because they brought it up on numerous occasions that there could be some sort of surveillance or something like that on the bridges.
Okay, I yield my time. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Moreno.
First of all, thank you, Chairman, for putting this hearing together. I think it's very timely. Mr. Sola, I heard you say, it kind of rang in my head, you've navigated the canal 100 times. I mean, that's you have pretty good experience. I want to turn the testimony a little bit different direction. You obviously haven't been there that much. Tell me what, for the testimony, what are the people of Panama? You have obviously probably been to my home country where I was born in Colombia. What is the sentiment among the people for how they feel about America?
Senator, I have many friends and family and professional relationships in Panama, and the bond between the United States and Panama is very deep. It's almost like the United States and Great Britain, for example. The Panamanians love baseball. They love basically a lot of the same things that we do. The people are absolutely wonderful.
Now, they've suffered through catastrophically bad leaders, especially today, the president of Colombia, Petro. We don't have to go down that path, but here's what I'd ask you is, obviously we understand about shipping. We understand the issues of trade, and that's been well documented. I think that the treaty's clearly in violation. There's no question about that. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see us speedily get to a point where we get a resolution allowing the president to renegotiate that or cancel that treaty. But here's my question to you. The Darien Gap is a stone's throw away here to Annapolis, maybe not even a little bit further than that. It used to be this insurmountable piece of geography that separated Colombia from Panama, but it's now used as a massive human and drug trafficking operation. The presence of multinational gangs, multinational criminal organizations in that area, primarily, I will suggest, funded by the Chinese. You don't have to comment on that. But what is the impact of these transnational gangs, this increase in human and drug trafficking doing to maritime activity along the canal?
Senator, the Darien Gap is one of the most dangerous treks that I think anybody can do, and thank God for the new policy that we have on migrants and people coming into the country, because countless people have been harmed, died, or even very bad things happen to them through there. on transnational gangs. I mean, anytime that there's money in a black market, they're going to go ahead and they're going to fill that void. So hopefully, as I understand, the Darien Gap is not being utilized very much right now because people are coming to the United States and now cannot come in.
Right, but the point of it is like, what is the impact on maritime activity there? In other words, security, Mr. Kramick, has got to be an issue for your members, and having that increased presence of transnational gang activity, drug trafficking. You're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Cocaine production in Colombia is at an all-time high. What impact does that have on your members?
Senator, it's something we work hard on every day. The World Shipping Council is partnered with the World Customs Organization and 58 customs agencies throughout the world. We ran actual operations to give data that we have on our supply chain and where there's anomalies to those customs officials and law enforcement authorities to action it. A lot of it, the flow for commercial vessels, not into the United States, but to the European Union, is coming from the transshipment point in Panama, where our containers are being exploited and contaminated. And so we are working hard as we sit here right now on that problem.
And of course, the point I'm making is that China's influence there, whether we want to make it a technical question as to what control means, it doesn't matter. When you have Chinese companies operating on both sides of the canal, having influence there through drug trafficking. They bring basic chemicals into Mexico, which makes its way here as fentanyl. You have enormous Chinese influence in Central and South America. And Mr. Sola, I go back to you with my final question. Do you think fundamentally the problem here is that America's just failed to engage properly with Latin America?
Yes, I do. I believe that we have not had a presence there for long enough. The State Department has designated countless past Panamanian presidents for corruption, but we haven't had the DOJ go ahead and have any convictions on those. I think that if we did have a conviction one way or another, I think that that would change the narrative quite considerably.
And so just one quick follow-up. So if the U.S. took control back of the canal, if that territory was completely controlled, protected by the United States of America, what influence could we have in solving a variety of problems, the shipping ones that we've talked about, but also having U.S. presence with military backup there in Panama, preventing transnational organizations, preventing human trafficking, preventing drug trafficking? Wouldn't that be celebrated among the free world as something that would be absolutely a net huge positive to that area?
Well, I can say this, that is probably one of the top contraband areas in the world just because of its geographical location and the amount of containers that they move. So I think any time that we can lower the amount of contraband being distributed around the world, we'd be doing a good service.
So, Mr. Chairman, like I said earlier, we ratified that treaty here in the United States Senate. I'd love to see us de-ratify it.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Really interesting hearing. In the year 1913, the governor of West Virginia said that the Panama Canal would be critical to the state's coal industry. What was then true is still true today. 11% of the cargo that goes through that canal is coal. Chairman Sola, thank you for your military service and for your great insight into this, into Panama. I know that the draft restrictions have been brought up already today, but the fact that bulk goods like West Virginia coal and other forms of energy cannot always be fully loaded to go through the canal is a major problem. I know they're investing about $900 million to try to make the canal more resilient, but what ways can we assure that our state's energy exports are actually getting where they need to go when they need to get there?
That's a very good question, Senator, and the bulk and the coal are probably the most affected by the draft restrictions that we have. The container ships and the passenger vessels have a much lighter draft. We talked extensively with the Canal Authority and also with the government of Panama on how they need to add water to the fresh water to the system. They're losing about 1 or 2% a year. So if they continue this way, the Panama Canal will be severely diminished by up to maybe 40% by 2050. So fresh water is definitely the key to this. I know that they are working with the Army Corps of Engineers. We've seen some of those studies, and they have put a variety of options out there for the Canal Authority to go ahead and take advantage of.
Let me ask this probably quite simple question is why would they be in opposition to putting more fresh water in the canal?
I don't believe, well, the Canal Authority.
I mean, it sounds easy, so maybe it's not quite as easy.
The Canal Authority isn't. The issue that they have is maybe 10 years ago, environmentalists kind of restricted what their watershed was of the canal, and that law has just recently been overturned, so now the canal actually has access to the watershed. So what they have to do is a major infrastructure project to go ahead and pull that water in. And at the same time that they are saving up or raising the fees for the major infrastructure project, they're giving more and more money to the national coffers. So it's up to about $2.4 billion right now, and they're saving for the infrastructure project.
Is that the $900 million infrastructure package I referenced? Is that the same project?
I believe it is. The Rio In deal?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So along with that, issue going through the canal, not just the offloading or, I mean, it's hard to offload coal out of a bulk container. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do if you can even do it. Is this whole thing about congestion pricing, kind of, nobody here from New York, are they? But, you know, the congestion pricing at the canal where you can outbid and skip the line, so then the line can be like 14 days later, even if you were at the front of the line. This is probably what Senator Sheehy's wondering, like, how did I get in front of him kind of question. So how is that working, and is that fair, and who makes the judgment? That to me, you were talking about corruption, that to me sounds like you could really be padding somebody's pockets here to be able to jump the line and have a significant effect.
Yeah, Senator, it is a auction system. It is being utilized more and more, and it is what I was most concerned about and continue to be most concerned about. Not necessarily right now because the unusual draft restrictions are not going on, but if there is another water shortage, the regular toll revenue has increased in terms of the canal, but what was really increased is the special revenue that they get from various fees and from this auction thing. That revenue has gone up about close to 300% for other transit services. So that's a huge amount. It's analogous to me in some ways. I know a lot of the ocean carrier companies got a lot of heat when they were making more money during the lack of the congestion during COVID. Well, this is sort of similar. They're providing fewer transits, and at the same time, they're making more money because of a market mechanism. Though, you know, talking about the Chinese Communist Party. Well, this is the other way. This is capitalist, but it is a different way of allocating space that they're utilizing more and more to make more and more money. Now, I have no idea. To the best of my knowledge, the money is going back to the Panamanian government. I don't know of any reason to doubt that, but that is a big cost. And as I said before, it does disadvantage certain kinds of cargoes because they might feel that they don't, they're on a ship which doesn't prioritize its time passage as much as other kinds of cargoes. I don't know how that affects coal.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Sheehy.
How long would it take China to block the canal for our usage if they decided to do it? I know you're not military experts, but I think you've been in the canal 100 times. You're all experts on the industry. If they wanted to deny our usage of it, how long would it take them to do it?
Senator, I can say that prior to the year 2000, the canal had a quick reaction force that kind of took all possibilities into consideration, either a ship be installed in the canal or to be able to move one out. I don't know what those capabilities or what the planning for that would be.
So effectively, we don't have a ready response. But if China,
I'm sure Southern Command does.
I don't like the mindset that's kind of pervaded that there's this far off hypothesis that.
But Senator, you're not talking to military experts. We're here because it's commercial reasons.
But this isn't a military question. I mean, if he's driven the canal 100 times and you are a maritime expert, a couple of years ago, as you remember, I think it was the Ever Given jackknifed in the Suez Canal. That's not a military operation. That's a ship that turns sideways. So if China chose to, how fast could they close the canal to our usage?
Well, they could probably do a similar thing, but it would more be an act of terrorism than it would be because they have facilities there. Most of this discussion has involved the economic threats that China is bringing up because of the Belt and Road Initiative and having these investments in other countries. But yeah, I mean, it's not hard to close off a waterway. Panama Canal is actually quite vulnerable in terms of infrastructure. It's not, this is not a fort or militarily reinforced location. Now you're getting to the end of my knowledge of that. But no, it would not take long, but I don't know what it has to do with, it's not accelerated because they have people at either port, unless you believe that they're, in theory, it's easier to infiltrate those ports with Chinese spies than it is other kinds of things. But that's totally out of my purview. That's more science.
Well, I don't think it is out of your purview. I think the reality is the canal is an economic engine. It is also a national security engine. And I appreciate, I'm not trying to be combative or setting any traps. I'm just trying to ask a common sense question, which is, we can dance around, I'm not an expert in this, I'm an expert in that, but the canal is vulnerable, as we've stated.
I guess, Senator, I'm just sort of saying, why would they bother with a military-like operation when they can get what they want with non-military means? If they can have influence in other ways.
That's the point of the question.
Okay.
Is we segregate ourselves artificially in a way that they do not. We segregate ourselves, well, let's talk about military, let's talk about intelligence, let's talk about economics. China doesn't work that way. It's a whole of government approach. They don't draw a delineation between an economics discussion and a military one. And their attack may not look like Pearl Harbor. It may look like an everyday ship that decides, it pulls into the locks and blows itself up, and now the locks are non-functional for our usage, and we can't support an inter-ocean fleet transfer. And our ability to defend it, as you referred to, Chairman, is now inhibited by the fact that we no longer have the military infrastructure around the canal that we did just as recently as 1999. So from a commercial perspective, do the shipping companies have concerns over the security of the narrow waterways? We've got Straits of Malacca, we've got Suez Canal, we've got Gibraltar, we've got Panama. Is that a concern that's thrown around in the boardrooms of the largest shipping corporations in the world?
Senator, I think it's something they think about every day. I mean, really, it's drawn into sharp relief with the Red Sea that it was what I call a pink flamingo. Like there's black swans that just come up, and there's pink flamingos that you can see but you don't act. But no one really thought a whole lot that one of the most important waterways in the world could be denied, and moreover that it could be denied for such a sustained period. The good news is that
and denied, I might add, by a disaffected non-state actor of Bedouins running around with rocket launchers, who also managed to beat us in a 20-year war in Afghanistan. But my point to saying all this is we're just debating operational control of the canal. Yet it seems very clear to all of us that a very simple act can debilitate the canal and eliminate our ability to use it in a matter of minutes with no warning. And we have no ability to intervene or stop that. To me, that means we do not have operational control of the canal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm told Senator Young is on his way, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions and give him a few minutes to get here. Chairman Sola, you have a deep understanding of Panama and the canal from personal experience, in addition to your work on the Federal Maritime Commission. One example of China's influence with the Panamanian government was the effort to seize land near the Pacific end of the canal to build a new Chinese embassy, including your land. Can you describe your personal experience, including how Panama ignored property rights as it sought to appease China with the new embassy?
Yes, Senator. About 10 years ago, the maritime business of my family expanded tremendously. And we were given a concession to build a marina on the Pacific area of Panama. We also incorporated a cruise component to that. We brought the cruise companies to Panama. This would have been the very first cruise port in the Pacific. We spent millions of dollars on consultants with Atkins Global, Moffett and Nichols, all the best consultants in the world, and everything was fine. When Panama turned over to Belts and Roads, they told us that concession was going to be nationalized. Then what they did is they rescinded our concession for the property. We were going to build the cruise port for $30 million, U.S. private funds. They gave the concession to a Chinese competitor and paid the Chinese competitor to date $300 million to build that cruise port. It's going to take the Panamanian people 375 years to get it back. I'm from Miami. That's the most expensive cruise port in the world, by far, by passenger. In addition to that, they took where our land is going to be for the marina, they designated that to be the embassy for the People's Republic of China. So what happened next is absolutely appalling, because when I went to the U.S. Embassy and I went to Commerce Department, they told me to fill out a complaint. When I filled out the complaint, I went to my senator at the time, it was Bill Nelson, and I remember that I was denied being able to even file a complaint, because the land that the Chinese embassy, or the land that was going to be used by the Chinese embassy, my environmental permit for the marina was going to expire in 6 months. So the United States Commerce Department would not even allow me to file a complaint. So I brought that issue here. And thanks to the good work of, at the time, I think it was Chairman Nelson and Chairman Wicker, that we were able to unwind that. After about 6 years, Panama did the right thing and returned the land to my family.
Very instructive. Senator Young.
Thank you, Chairman, for holding this important hearing. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. The Panama Canal underpins our current economic strength and national security. When 40% of U.S.-bound container traffic depends on a single waterway, we cannot afford unilateral toll hikes that choke out competition and leave our smaller carriers or our Midwestern exporters on the hook. For instance, in my home state of Indiana, manufacturing firms and farmers rely on consistent, reasonably priced shipping routes to move heavy machinery, auto parts, and ag products like corn and soy. If the Canal Authority's auction system prices them out, the ripple effects on American jobs and supply chains could be devastating. Chairman Sola, given our enormous stake in the canal's operation, do you believe Congress or the FMC should more aggressively use existing legal authorities, or even create new legislative tools to block or penalize toll practices that disproportionately harm U.S. shippers and exporters?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And I grew up in Goodland, Indiana, so that you know.
Fantastic.
I do believe that we should continue to monitor the situation, and if we do need more regulations or statutes, that we would come back to Congress, because we get our marching instructions from you. Moving the agricultural products that we get out of the Midwest all over the world and through the country, not only do we focus on the Panama Canal, but we also focus on about $5 trillion worth of goods coming in and leaving the United States here at the Federal Maritime Commission. So it's definitely one of our main concerns.
Well, thank you. I'm not surprised. I always tell people Indiana is a maritime state. If you think about our dependence on the waterways and our shipping lines and all the rest. So you're certainly proving that. But so we will stay in touch, and if you in the future would like to outline any mechanisms or measures that you think would be effective to help ensure fair treatment for our interests, please let me and others on this committee know. When the two Panama Canal treaties were signed, we lived in a different world, one where Chinese state-backed actors didn't wield strong influence over global infrastructure, and issues like drought were rarely factored into international agreements. As we all know, times have certainly changed, but the United States is still the canal's biggest customer, and quite frankly, we have every right to expect an operational framework that acknowledges our modern security and economic challenges. States like Indiana, with robust exports, feel these impacts, even if we're far from the canal itself. Chairman Sola, and then I'll allow others to respond. In light of evolving conditions, especially increased foreign investment from China, do you believe the U.S. should explore a more comprehensive update or supplemental protocols to these decades-old treaties?
I definitely believe that we should support U.S. investment, and not having an ambassador for so long has been detrimental to us, especially as the case that I just mentioned earlier, where we didn't have an ambassador and we had a U.S. company in need of service. So however we can promote U.S. investment, especially in infrastructure, this is where China is definitely beating us with the Belt and Roads, where they understand that. And I believe that, you know, our Exim Bank and our DFC is so limited in what they can do by the restrictions that they have, that we're not able to invest into infrastructure like we should.
I hope the administration will prioritize this ambassador spot as nominations are made. I hope we'll prioritize it in the Senate. My colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle will be warm to that nomination and moving it quickly. Something both parties, frankly, have fallen short on in recent years is prioritizing these. But other comments, Mr. Maffei?
Yeah, well, Senator, it won't surprise you since you and I served together in the House that I actually am pretty bipartisan. I agree with the chairman on what he said. I will say that that certainly we need to look at other kinds of ways to get U.S. companies in positions where they can truly compete with the Chinese and some of these things. And blaming it all on Panama, it really misses the point. I've seen the same thing in Greece, where Greece didn't want to give the concession of its largest port to a Chinese company, but because of its financial difficulties, it was getting pressure from international organizations such as the IMF, Europe, and even maybe some in the United States to do so. So I just ask you to look at that. And I do want to say one quick thing. You're right about the cost, and as I said before you were able to get here, the Panamanians are making far more on their canal than they ever had before. That's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's going to the right place, but where they're really making the money is on these auctions, and that is why remains a concern of mine, I'm sure the chairman's, and that is where we are looking at potentially are using our authority under Section 19 of the Merchant Marine Act, where we could, if we can show that it is basically a problem with the foreign trade of the U.S. It's interfering with foreign trade of the U.S. There are certain things that we can do, but I do think we need more information before we could make that kind of action. But we're certainly working on that, and we do have that authority at the FMC.
Thank you, and good to see you again, sir. Mr. Kremick, did you have anything?
We had discussed, Senator Young, some of the infrastructure projects to make the canal more sustainable and viable, and how the United States, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, has already done some feasibility reviews of those projects. So that would certainly be something to take a look at to make the canal, viable with an additional supplies of fresh water.
Thank you. Chairman?
Senator, if I may?
Sure.
Senator, sorry, it's I'm on Zoom. You spoke about renegotiating the treaties, and yes. I think one of the things about treaties as an instrument of governance is they're not very flexible, and they don't really have automatic processes typically for easy amendment. And before this hearing, I spent a fair amount of time reviewing the ratification hearings in the Senate in 1978. And back then, the principal concerns the Senate was concerned with then is the Soviets and Cuba, actually, not China and Iran. So the world has changed a huge amount. China's role has changed a huge amount. And of course, back then, 1999 seemed very far off. 2025 seemed a world away. And as a result, I think it is useful to revisit treaties and seek to renegotiate them, to update them to sort of current events. And of course, the United States has a considerable amount of leverage it can use to seek such additional protocols to modernize these treaties to current events and current geopolitical realities.
Makes great sense, and I'm glad you spoke up. Thank you, Mr. Kantorovich. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to ask a couple of follow-ups, and then we're going to wrap up the hearing. Commissioner Maffei, you mentioned a minute ago if a determination was made that this was having negative impacts on U.S. trade. You said there are a number of remedies that are possible, and you didn't specify what those were, so I just wanted to ask what you were referring to.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things we can do as countermeasures, such as, sanction Panamanian ships. That could be Panamanian flag ships. Panamanian flag is one of their major sources of revenue. It is the number one what we call flag of convenience in the world. There are several others, and I think I'd like to get back to you in writing. I mean, I'm not trying to avoid the question,
Yeah,
but
no, I would
that
welcome
way I can
that.
put the, we can, and we'll, if you don't mind, we'll get together and do a joint answer. We'll put where our authority comes from, what we think we can do, and maybe even what we're concerned about or what the limits to that would be.
Well, and I'll say that this hearing has been a nice bipartisan demonstration of a lot of expertise. There's a reason you guys have your the role you have, because you know what you're talking about.
I'm hoping my chairmanship, which ended last week after a full term, will result in a full, very successful term for my good friend and colleague as chairman. Maybe the friendliest transition in Washington this week.
Professor Kontorovich, I want to get back also to the exchange you had with Senator Young, and then it harkens back to the opening exchange you and I had. We've heard testimony that Panama may well be in violation of this treaty in at least two regards. One, with respect to its obligation to keeping the Panama Canal neutral and the major concessions to China, the control that China has over ports on both ends, and the bridge across the canal, which has the potential to shut down transit. We also heard testimony about the degree of revenue that Panama is taking, and that's potentially in violation of the obligation that tolls and other charges shall be just, reasonable, equitable, and consistent with principles of international law. I want to ask you, Professor, assume that the United States makes the determination that Panama is in violation of this treaty. I asked about what the remedies were, and you mentioned at the time military force. So military force is always one potential remedy. What other potential remedies are there? And in particular, could a consequence of being in breach of the treaty be a determination that the treaty is null and void, that the concession of control of the Panama Canal to Panama is no longer in force, and could that, under international law, result in the United States returning to operating the Panama Canal? What's your judgment?
Yeah, I think treaties like this demonstrate that countries really need to think long and hard before they give away strategic assets, because the United States is free to cancel this treaty or at any time withdraw from the treaty, as it were. But given that the United States has transferred control and sovereignty of the canal zone to Panama, the cancellation of the treaty would not necessarily reverse that concession. Concessions that have to do with sovereign control are not particularly reversible. For example, Israel made a deal with Lebanon to give maritime territory to Lebanon in exchange for peace just 2 years ago, did not get peace. It's not clear that it can simply cancel and get that territory back. Now, it is the case that America can take all sorts of measures to insist on neutrality. And if neutrality means putting American firms in operation, or otherwise taking other steps, that is something that can be done. But a kind of territorial control is not a clear remedy unless it is something that just accompanies the steps needed to restore the regime of neutrality.
All right, well, I want to thank all the witnesses for their important testimony here today. Senators will have until the close of business on Tuesday, February 4th to submit questions for the record. The witnesses will have until the end of the day on Tuesday, February 18th to respond to those questions. And this concludes today's hearing. The committee stands adjourned.
Hey y'all, it's Silk from the Diamond and Silk Chit Chat live show. Look, don't forget to check me out right here on RSBN Network. Be sure to watch the show on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and I want you to support Right Side Broadcasting Network. Yes, it's imperative that you do so, okay? I look to see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
A large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving us with a ton of extra MyPillows. But you know what? That's their loss. I'm going to make it your gain. For the first time ever, you get standard classic MyPillows for wholesale prices, only $14.88. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.88. But it gets even better. For a limited time, I'm going to offer my entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Upgrade to a queen-size MyPillow for just $18.88. King size, only $1 more. Get my body pillows for $29.88 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.88. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on the screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever on TV, including my standard size MyPillow, only $14.88. They've never been offered this low before. We have limited quantities at this price, so limit's going to be 10, and once they're gone, they're gone.
Welcome to Right Side Broadcasting Network, your trusted conservative news outlet. At RSBN, we deliver the truth when the mainstream media falls short. Since 2015, we've proudly broadcasted every single one of President Trump's iconic MAGA rallies, bringing you the excitement and energy live before anyone else. By watching RSBN, you get an unfiltered front row view of the action on the ground. We interview the crowds to give a voice to millions of Americans just like you. We show you President Trump's speeches in their entirety, free from interruptions and censorship. We cover the stories that matter to you with the integrity and passion you deserve. Thank you for choosing RSBN as your home for America First News. Together, we stand strong, united, and informed. So join us and be part of the right side of history.